Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our December 6, 2022 Board Business Meeting. Welcome to our board members, MCPS staff, and members of our community who are joining us here today, and those of you watching this meeting via live stream on the MCPS website and MCPS TV. Now let us begin by standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will now call roll to recognize board members and establish that we have a quorum. Mr. Kim?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Ms. Evans?
Good afternoon.
Ms. Wolf?
Good afternoon.
Ms. Grace Rivera-Oven?
Good afternoon.
Ms. Yang?
Good afternoon.
And Ms. Madrasky is here. Ms. Harris is joining us via live stream. Now we can begin the meeting with the approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
Dr. McKnight, item number 5. Oh, here we go. Moving too quick. All in favor? That is unanimous with those present. Dr. McKnight, item number 5.
Thank you, President Silvestri. I move forward the monthly Human Resources and Development Report for approval.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. That is unanimous.
Thank you.
Dr. McKnight, do you have additional resolutions?
Yes, thank you. I do have a resolution. Whereas the death on October 30th, 2022 of Mr. Diego LeBlond, special education paraeducator at Colonel Magruder High School, deeply has saddened the staff, students, and members of the Board of Education. During the 11 days that Mr. LeBlond worked for Montgomery County Public Schools, he demonstrated his commitment to students and staff by contributing to an enjoyable learning environment. Mr. LeBlond proved himself to be a hard-working team member at Magruder High School who got along very well with his coworkers and students. Now therefore be it resolved that the members of the Board of Education and the Superintendent of Schools express our sorrow at the death of Mr. LeBlond and extend deepest sympathy to his family.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. And that is unanimous with those present. That is unanimous.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is public comments. Public comment is one of the opportunities to hear the views and receive advice of community members. Board members will take your comments into consideration, but it's not our practice to take action at this time on issues that are raised. We encourage public input on policy, programs, and practices. This is not the proper avenue to address specific student or employee matters, so we encourage everyone to utilize existing avenues of redress for complaints. This is a public meeting, and we expect the conduct of all speakers and members of the audience to be within the bounds of proper etiquette. Inappropriate personal remarks, rude retorts, and other behavior is out of order and will not be tolerated. Those who demonstrate disruptive or disrespectful behavior during public comments may be asked to leave the room. Please check our website for information about upcoming board meetings, hearings, and work sessions, including any changes to our meeting start times. Today we have 6 people signed up to provide in-person testimony. Each speaker will receive 2 minutes for comments. When your name is called, please approach the table, speak clearly and directly into the microphone. 30 seconds prior to the expiration of a speaker's time, a yellow light will go on, accompanied by a beep. A red light and a buzzer signals that your time has expired. Please push the flat button below the microphone to turn it on and begin speaking. Push the same button once more at the sound of the buzzer to turn it off. In addition to our in-person speakers today, we have 1 person signed up to provide audio testimony and 1 person signed up to provide video testimony, in addition to a person that walked in today. We will play these submissions once all the in-person testimonies have concluded. Copies of testimonies can be found in board docs, where they are posted with other materials for this meeting. So if we could get the first three speakers to please come to the table, Jennifer Martin from MCEA, Anna John, and Kara Jackson. Ms. Martin, you may begin.
Well, good afternoon, Dr. McKnight and members of the board. I am Jennifer Martin, President of the Montgomery County Education Association. On behalf of MCEA, I congratulate Ms. Yang and Ms. Rivera-Oven as you begin your first term as members of the MCPS Board of Education. Members of MCEA worked hard to support you in taking on this role, and we're eager to work with you to provide an excellent education for every student. Each of you brings a deep connection to the communities we serve, a well-informed perspective on the issues we face in public education, and an understanding of both the needs and the promise of our students. MCEA also offers congratulations to Ms. Wolf and Ms. Silvestri as you begin a new term on the board. While we have not supported some of the decisions you've made in the past, we recognize that you've always tried to work in the best interest of both staff and students. A new term provides a fresh start. We wish you well, and we stand ready to continue to engage in this work together. We MCEA educators love our public schools and the work we do with our students and families. But for too long, we have been doing more with less, coping with a loss in real wages, growing staffing shortages, and an ever-increasing set of daily demands. Meanwhile, we often lack materials necessary to ensure quality learning experiences, and our students continue to require intensive support to address their personal and academic needs. As you consider budget priorities for the next school year, we urge you to have the courage to demand what is truly needed to attract, support, and retain high-quality educators. The staff and students of Montgomery County are counting on you to seek the full funding needed to ensure excellent working and learning conditions for us all. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the board and Dr. McKnight. My name is Anna John, and I'm a 9th grade student attending Walter Johnson High School. I'm the freshman class president and hold leadership roles in organizations across the county. I am here to present a solution for the lack of air conditioning in MCPS. Temperatures in classrooms are never stable. We can see that during the summer months they get hot and humid, and during our current winter season, classrooms are getting chilly. Many students in MCPS, including myself, suffer from this inconsistent air conditioning. According to an incident published by Bethesda Beats on June 1st, 2022, one of the air conditioners at Magruder High School stopped functioning, creating excess heat in classrooms requiring an early dismissal for students. These kinds of issues should not be overlooked, as they interfere with students' abilities to learn. There are two ways that we can improve the AC system. First, MCPS can upgrade the HVAC systems, which would allow students to study in a comfortable environment, which would improve the focus and productivity. Second is to implement more green roofs in schools. This would reduce HVAC loads and save energy. Green roofs can reduce energy costs and increase the lifespan of heating, ventilation, and the air conditioning system. It is crucial to recognize that green roofs are a more affordable and sustainable solution. Implementing more green roofs in schools will have a long-term positive impact on school infrastructure. Green roofs have long-term cost-saving, environmental benefits, and most importantly, allow students to have a better education. Concluding this, I urge MCPS to implement green roofs in schools across the county. Thank you.
Ms. Jackson.
Good afternoon, members of the board and Dr. McKnight. My name is Kara Jackson, and I am a parent of an MCPS student and also an educational researcher. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the proposed 2023-24 school calendar options. As you know, the mission of MCPS is for every student to have the skills to be successful in college and career. Disruptions to learning opportunities that occurred as a result of the pandemic have impacted students' academic progress. In 2022, the average 4th grade math score decreased by 5 points. The average 8th grade math score decreased by 8 points compared to 2019, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. The Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program results from the fall of 2021 were abysmal, and statewide, 0% of 8th graders achieved a level 4 on the Maryland Integrated Science Assessments in the spring of 2022. Getting students back on track requires instructional time. There is substantial evidence that more instructional time improves student outcomes. And yet all of the 4 of the proposed calendars options increase the number of early release days to 10, up from 7 in the current school year, and the original calendar for last year only had 4 early release days. Little by little, these early release days are curtailing students' learning opportunities. I am a former teacher myself, and I appreciate the need for educators to have time to plan. But using early release days to give teachers planning time robs students of valuable instructional opportunities that they can ill afford to sacrifice right now. Early release days may also discourage attendance, further exacerbating the loss of time on task in the classroom. If we truly want all of our students to be successful in college and career, I urge you to provide teachers with sufficient planning time without detracting from student time with their teachers. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. If we could get the next set of speakers to come to the table, please. That is Glenn Miller, Katie Spurlock, and Jeffrey Gantz. Mr. Miller?
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. My name is Glenn Miller, and I teach the Curriculum for Agriculture Science Education, or CASE, at Sherwood High School. I'm speaking to you today to emphasize the importance of your support of the CASE program. The Blueprint for Maryland's Future places a high emphasis on career and technology education, or CTE. CASE is unique in that students learn knowledge and skills that can lead to many successful careers such as environmental law, floriculture, engineering, and veterinary medicine, just to name a small few. CASE is in the position to support college and career readiness of the Blueprint by providing a pathway that builds upon student strengths and aligns with 21st century industry needs. We must work to eliminate the barriers to student participation in this program. In Montgomery County, we have unique opportunities and industries provided by the Agricultural Reserve. We have the opportunity to build partnerships with local farms, nurseries, parks departments, and even the USDA. Pause for a moment and consider the opportunities for our students. Further, the board has made it a priority to have sustainable practices in their buildings. Under that policy, it states that MCPS will have curricular offerings that will align with the Maryland Environmental Literacy Standards. Growing and supporting the CASE natural resource programs at Sherwood and Northwood would directly accomplish this task, so much so that the second course by itself, Natural Resources and Ecology, should be offered to students as an environmental science class. As I finish today, I have 2 requests. First, please come out and visit the greenhouse at Sherwood. This is the building where the program will be taught and where these beautiful poinsettias were grown. Secondly, I am calling on each of you to break down the barriers to student participation in CASE, help grow the CASE program, promote the CASE program, and support the CASE program. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these beautiful flowers. Ms. Spurlock?
Good afternoon, Superintendent McKnight and honorable board members. I'm Katie Spurlock, an MCPS parent, and I am here to talk about sharing phonics with families. Many children need more practice than their peers when it comes to mastering foundational skills. This was true for my 2 kids in both math and reading. To practice addition or the multiplication facts, you can use a scrap paper or a deck of cards. But when a child needs practice with the phonics facts, you need special materials like these, bulky and expensive, that contain step-by-step word lists and sentences for reading and writing, and they can cost over $100. Schools cannot indiscriminately share copyrighted materials, so it's often been every parent for themselves when it comes to getting them. Worse yet, families who have never seen a phonics scope and sequence are confused about what it is their child is struggling with when it comes to sounding out new words. When children struggle to read, it is scary for both the child and the parent, but less scary when families have access to guidance and the facts. This is what inspired me to create open source phonics. As you know, MCPS has shifted to structured literacy, which is a fantastic change. I am so proud that MCPS is also embracing children who need more practice with phonics in later elementary school by providing families with guidance and free materials. I want to thank Dr. Peggy Pugh, Mrs. Nikki Hazel, Mrs. Malika Brown, and Mrs. Colleen Shaper, who have been working on this effort. I hope you will all learn more about this promising work. Thank you, and thank you for your service to our children.
Thank you, Mr. Gantz.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Jeffrey Gantz, and I am a parent of twins in the 4th grade at William Tyler Page Elementary School. Page Elementary uses portables and is currently undergoing construction of an addition to the school while the school is still being used. In my mind, and that of other parents I have spoken to, there are concerns regarding the safety and security for the children in the portables. To help with my testimony, I have provided you with pictures. The pictures really don't convey the full situation, so I would urge each of you to make an in-person visit to Page Elementary. If you would please look at picture 1, I have tried to show you the placement of the portables in relation to the school. You can see they are at the back of the school field, which requires a very long walkway for access. Originally, there was no cover on the walkway, and we are thankful and grateful that was quickly rectified. However, the issue of a cover was not rectified regarding the bathrooms for use by the portable classrooms. Please take a look at pictures 2 and 3. You will see the walk to the bathrooms is exposed to the elements. Should it be raining or snowing, a child has to come down the ramp and then walk over to the bathrooms, across the gravel, up the stairs, unlock the door, and do the reverse to get back to class. And if for some reason the child needs to use the accessible bathroom, it is even more of an ordeal going up the ramp. Would you find this acceptable if you needed to leave your office and go outside to get to the bathroom on a rainy or snowy day? The second concern is regarding the security of the portable classrooms. For this, I draw your attention to pictures 4 through 10, where I have tried to give you a sense of the open access for anyone to the portables. There is nothing to stop someone who wants to inflict harm from doing so. There is nothing to stop a child from leaving school grounds. There are no security cameras for this part of the school, and there is no fence to secure the area. I ask on behalf of the Page Elementary community the following. 1, have multiple cameras installed for a layer of security. 2, provide fencing around the portables and walkways to make the area more secure. And 3, extend the walkway cover to the bathrooms. If you had a child at Page Elementary, would you find this situation acceptable? I think not. We can and must do better to protect our children. Thank you.
Thank you. If we could get our last in-person speaker, Mr. Joe Shadshadi. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, this one right there.
Thanks. I'm Joe Shashadi, and I have a child in 5th grade. I'm here to talk about the criteria for middle school magnet lotteries and advanced course placement in high and AIM. MCPS in the last couple of years have moved away from measures of ability due to pandemic exigencies in evaluating students' appropriateness for the lotteries. Initially, they cast a very wide net to compensate for this, given the uncertainties. Last year, they adopted stricter criteria with little flexibility. All the criteria must be met, and they're single point criteria instead of multiple point. Without this kind of ability-based measure, it's entirely based on exposure. And some students have not gotten the same kind of exposure as others. There have been some adjustments made, but 2 considerations have been left out. Students in one-way immersion have been taught in the target language, receiving only half a year of 1 hour a week English during the 4th grade, but they're evaluated based on their knowledge of English in the MAP-R. A proposed solution to this would be to make an adjustment for these one-way immersion students that is similar to those who are receiving emerging multilingual learner status. The second is that an A is required in first quarter math. This ignores the fact that some students are taking Math 5-6 versus Math 5, and the grade is not equivalent. A solution to this may be to consider the performance of those in 5-6 either as a B or an A in the prior quarter that has the same subject matter. Time is short. The response of the people in OSIP has been delayed because of a variety of things. OSA, I understand to be involved. The data is available. The inequity is obvious. MCPS has made real consequences out of that. And the corrections are clear. Thank you. I'll try to follow up with email.
Thank you. We now have one audio testimony submitted by Tara Floyd. If we could get MCPS TV to please play the audio.
Good afternoon. My name is Tara Floyd. As a Montgomery County taxpayer and MCPS parent, 11 years and counting, I have tried my best throughout the pandemic and the associated staff shortages to be empathetic and patient. The services provided to our families by MCPS are not incidental. Ongoing issues with last-minute bus route cancellations continue to be of great concern. The safety of our children is and should remain paramount. Working parents, especially essential workers and low-wage earners who do not have the benefit of flexible scheduling or guaranteed time off, continue to suffer the effects of the transportation shortcomings of the county school bus program. It is discouraging to see programs such as the walking bus, or worse, the so-called bus sweeper program, touted as fun or visionary. On the contrary, they're not even acceptable stopgap measures. A recent communication that came out at around 6:30 in the morning concerning my 10th graders bus route put it this way: you will need to provide alternative transportation. What a directive. The fact that this was for morning and afternoon routes tells me that there are substandard attempts during the day, if at all, toward a fix. Simply put, the county's problem is now my problem as an individual parent. I can't be the only one frustrated by the scope, extent, and length of time of this problem. The need for a bus sweeper program, which aims to prevent children from being left outside waiting in the street for a bus that unexpectedly never comes, is frankly shameful. Please work together and hold those accountable who are paid to ensure this basic level of service is met. We have been patient, we have given grace, as we have so often been reminded to do. This does not mean we should forgo basic responsibility to families when it comes to school transportation. Please, in your role, ask those responsible to do whatever it takes to restore reliable bus service for every student every day. Thank you.
Thank you. We received one video testimony submitted by Praneel Saverna. Please play the video.
Good afternoon, members of the board and Dr. McKnight. I am Praneel Savarna, a sophomore at Clarksburg High School, and I am testifying today to address the lack of standardization of courses across MCPS high schools. Across 26 high schools in Montgomery County, only 6 have the AP Capstone program. This demonstrates the clear disparity in education and opportunities a student would have based on where they went to school. This gap is not only present in high schools, but in middle schools as well. Certain middle schools across Montgomery County allow for a full 1AB language course to be taken as a 6th grader, while other middle schools mandate that students break it up into multiple years. The discrepancies don't end here, and while Montgomery County may justify this with the numerous programs they have that allow students to go to different schools and take certain pathways, it is not fair for students to have to go to a different school to receive the same opportunities as other students. Thank you for your time.
This will conclude our public comments. The next business meeting of the Board of Education for public comment is Thursday, January 12th, 2023. Sign-ups for public comment will open the evening of Thursday, January 5th, 2023. In addition to the online sign-ups for public comment, we allow for in-person, same-day sign-ups when space allows. Unallocated slots may be filled on a first-come, first-served basis on the day of the meeting. In order to sign up in person, please arrive 15 to 20 minutes before the start of the open session and sign the form. In-person sign-ups will close 15 minutes before public comment begins or when slots are filled. So at this time, I'm going to open it up to my colleagues to see if there are any comments or questions. And bear with me as I see over the flowers for your light. Ms. Wolf.
Thank you, Madam President. I had some concern about the security that Mr. Gantz raised, and I would like to know if we could have somebody take a look at that, because I'm always concerned, especially when we have elementary school children and there are no cameras in the back. I don't know about a fence. I don't really know what the conditions are, but if we could get somebody that could talk about it or take a look at it and get back to us, I'd appreciate that.
Ms. Wolf, I just want to say yes, Mr. Hull will work with the staff to make sure that we are out there and follow up actually with Mr. Gantz so that we can make sure we understand exactly what's happening at that school particularly.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank our students for coming to testify. HVAC is in the operational budget, so we won't even try to explain that. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Miller for this beautiful flower, the red especially. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions, Ms. Yang?
All right. First of all, thank you for everyone who came in to testify. Not very long ago, I also have multiple times came to the board to testify. I think your input, feedback, suggestions make us a better school system that can serve everyone better. Now, I do have a few questions. I know we are going to cover the school calendar later in, so maybe then we can take a look at Ms. Jackson's feedback. And about Page Elementary School, you mentioned the camera, but I also do want to say if the covering is possible, these are elementary school students, inclement weather pose a challenge. We would not want any students hesitant to go use the bathroom for health concerns. So thank you so much for that. And we, of course, continue to hear about the bus situation, and in the past board meetings, we have heard the school district's effort in addressing this issue. I have one question. In that testimony, it mentioned that the email sent out to the family is say that your morning and afternoon bus route service is canceled. So is that our standard procedure that in the morning we already know what will happen in the afternoon?
Thank you. I'm going to ask Ms. Edwards to come to the table to address that specifically. We've been through a number of different evolutions of how we've tried to get feedback from our community about the best way to communicate. And one of our most recent actions have been to communicate broadly when there is an issue. But the morning and afternoon, I must say that's the first that I've heard that, so I want to make sure we address that. Ms. Edwards.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your question. We do communicate with the community should we need to do a canceled bus route. Initially, I would say back in October, we were looking at AM and PM because we had a difficulty having a driver in the morning. We would try to cover throughout the day. If anything changed coming up to that PM route, then we would communicate with the schools as well as to the families again to let them know that we would be able to transport their children in the afternoon.
So that is to help the family actually be proactive to plan the afternoon absence of service?
Absolutely. It's to think about the proactive planning for the afternoon. It's also to be able to support at the school level so that we know who those students are who may not have, who possibly could not have transportation within the afternoon. And so one of the things that we had started to do was we wanted to communicate by 6:30 to let families know if there was absence of bus service for a particular route or a particular portion of the community. We really wanted to focus on the needs of, if children were outside, they were waiting. We had partnered with our CEOs who were providing some coverage within the area. In addition, we did hear the parent talk about the sweeper bus program that came afterwards to pick up any students that may be out. The last 3 weeks, we have been able to run all of our bus routes successfully. 100% of our bus routes have been on the road. And so we look forward to continuing to do the work that needs to be done to sustain that throughout the school year.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer.
You're welcome.
Now, Mr. Miller, is it Mr. Miller? I will take you up on the offer to visit your program. I'm very happy with our big agriculture reserve here in the county. We actually have agriculture program. I'm a proud member of 4-H, so very happy to hear that we have these availabilities. Yes. Thank you.
Ms. Grace Rigotta-Elvin?
Yes, thank you. I had similar questions about the buses, because this is something that I hear often, especially with parents in the county. And as we're entering the winter months, I just think it's very crucial that the services, I know it's difficult, I know we have shortage of staff, but it's very crucial to working parents, especially those single parents like my mom, to ensure that, they can make alternative plans and sometimes cannot go to work because they have to keep their children at home. So that is one. Mr. Miller, thank you so much for the poinsettia. As a graduate from Gaithersburg High School back in the day and a member of Future Farmers of America, I too would like to take you on the opportunity to visit your school. I'm a huge supporter. I learned so many of my skills on how to do planting and so on during that time, as well as my automobile class on how to change a tire. These are such incredible skills to have. So thank you. Thank you for being here and for advocating. As you know, the Up County is home to the Agri Reserve, and we have such a plethora of farms and so on. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Mrs. Martin, for those welcoming remarks. I do want to get a little bit more information about the young man who talked about that we only have the AP curriculum only available out of the 26 high schools, that only a handful offers them. That is something that is, it's a concern to me, as well as I hear from some parents and so on, that sometimes they don't have the luxury to be able to drive their children, even though if that's open, because of lack of transportation. So, I want to thank our students, and I feel the pain. I went to a school where sometimes the HVAC did not work back in the day, and it was just, so it's important. We have a very old system, I understand, but to close school is a little bit drastic and to interrupt education. So I know that is something that is in everybody's radar, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Rivera-Oven, for your comment on that. And yes, to our students and to our staff, we know that in order for our students to learn, they've got to be in a comfortable environment. So we are very astute to that and making sure that we address their needs. I did want to circle back to Mr. Savarna's comment. He must have been peeping in my office recently, and recently as of last week, because I just brought together leadership from the College Board and MCPS to discuss the future of AP/IB and the expansion of how that needs to be more inclusive in Montgomery County Public Schools, really soliciting their support for how do we brand that specifically in a new and different way. So I could not agree more with what he said. He's spot on, and I just ask everybody to stay tuned as we continue to share more in the coming weeks about what that looks like.
Thank you. Mr. Kim?
Yes, I too really appreciated Mr. Savarna's comments, raising really what is an underlying disparity in our school system, that the school you go to, where you live, determines the educational opportunities you have, the work that really encapsulates the very essence of educational equity. So my understanding and an approach that I think continues to provide us an area of hope and optimism around this work is how we can leverage our virtual classrooms to perhaps address some of these disparities in class offerings between courses. My understanding is that there already is, outside of the virtual academy, being enrolled in the virtual academy, there's already a number of opportunities to take classes otherwise unavailable at your school. But I'm just wondering, as a student, if I was interested in taking a class that my school doesn't offer virtually, what does that actually look like today? How is that opportunity currently available? And what are ways we can expand and really leverage this to more thoroughly address those disparities?
Thank you, Mr. Kim. We've had many conversations about this and how virtual has provided an opportunity for us to expand access in the way that we have not before. So we'll be coming forward actually and continuing to share an expansion of that in our virtual academy. The Maryland State Department of Education gave all districts an opportunity to look at the virtual academy in terms of whether you wanted to look at offering it as a school or as a program. Well, we thought both, because there are benefits to both, which allows us the opportunity to provide students with that format for what they need, but then it also, the program perspective, allows us to be able to take specialized courses so that students can get that expanded to them so they can have access to it regardless of what school that they're in. So that has been our approach that will allow us to be able to expand our programming to our students. The other part of that, though, is we need to be honest about what AP and IB has meant in our county over a history of time. And it's been, not one that probably reached the depth of all of the students that we want to have access to it. One of the reasons I had a conversation with the leaders of College Board to say, what about the curriculum, what about the supports, and how can we be partners in how we look at what that expansion needs to be to open up opportunities of access for more of our students. A part of that is also making sure that our students feel that they can be successful in those courses. And part of what we're doing, and we heard from our students loud and clear, is that when they agree to take these courses, they want to feel like they're with adults who believe that they can be successful. Our students in Montgomery County Public Schools said that. So we recognize that this expansion goes beyond just making it available, but also making sure that the staff who is supporting the expansion of students send those messages. And they feel supported in what they need to make sure that the student can be successful in those courses that they have. So I share that with you because the expansion needs to be one that is taken in careful consideration to not just say we want to make it available, but we want to make sure students know that they go into it and we're going to support them and they're going to feel comfortable. And same for our families who have students who would be going into these programs. So I am actually absolutely thrilled about this because I think it's a different way in terms of how we've looked at expansion before. It's just not where else do we put it, but how do we make sure we support the students, the staff, and everybody to ensure that it is a rigorous opportunity, but one in which students will be successful.
And speaking of expansion, dual enrollment, of course, right, Dr. Floyd, is coming with a blueprint. And so that is another alternative that is going to greatly expand access for our high school students. It's going to be cost-free. So a great opportunity. Ms. Harris?
Yes, thank you, everybody. And sorry I can't be with you in person today. I just wanted to quickly follow up on Ms. John's testimony. One of the things that she mentioned was, the installation of green roofs in our new buildings. And I'm not sure if it's possible when we have to replace roofs occasionally to look at that as well. And I know our facilities team has sort of a robust program in support of our new sustainability policy of looking at either green roofs or the installation of solar on roofs as we march through our large list of projects. But I'm not sure we're doing a great job of really clearly showing the planning that's going into using these innovative, sustainable 21st century and beyond technologies in the capital projects that we do. And so maybe just something that we could follow up or have facilities follow up with Ms. John is a good way to share that information in a very easily accessible way, because I think there is a lot of work happening. But I think sometimes it's, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did it really fall? And so sometimes I think people aren't aware of the plans that are in place to really put flesh on the bones of our sustainability work. And then for Mr. Miller, again, he has my gratitude. He and I have been working for a while now and brainstorming around the amazing CASE program, which is only in its second year in MCPS. And I think it is very uniquely suited to address many of our blueprint goals and obligations of expanding CTE and building new partnerships to provide real hands-on career and community opportunities for students. And as Mr. Miller mentioned, opportunities for partnership building with the Parks Department. We have over 200 parks in the county. And if students in the CASE program, can go and get their hands-on field experience working alongside our experts there. Or we have so many community nurseries, and we used to be a far more agricultural county than we are, but we still have local community supported agriculture. And so part of my request, first I have a thank you for Dr. Floyd. At the beginning of the school year, actually, they were going to remove CASE from Sherwood because of low enrollment. And she jumped in right away to make it possible for Mr. Miller to continue teaching that, but not without cost. I mean, he's teaching that course at the same time he's teaching, and when I say at the same time, I mean in the same period that he's teaching other courses. so it's really, I think, incumbent on us to brainstorm with the teachers on the ground teaching these classes how to best promote and grow and make students aware of these amazing opportunities. And also to remove, I think some of the people in central office that work on our kind of CTE programming and our partnership building, that's a lot because we have so many programs across the county. And, if we can sort of deputize and empower our instructors like Mr. Miller to go out and start identifying really good partners that could support his program, that could check some boxes for us so that we are, fulfilling some of our blueprint goals and aspirations in the most efficient way possible. And because as, several of you have commented, FFA and Mr. Miller has started the FFA program up again at Springbrook at Sherwood this year. And it's amazing leadership opportunity for students as well. So I thank him, and I see so much opportunity there and possibility there. But I do think we need to be very intentional in the multiple ways we pull together to support it. And I appreciate everybody, Mr. Gans's testimony and what everyone else has said. Getting out there to look at those safety issues. One thing that occurred to me when Mr. Savarna was testifying is, we've had this conversation for a long time about what courses are offered where, and we like to say that demand drives instruction. What courses students want determines what courses are placed where, which is true to a point, but not always. And then also, capacity drives instruction, because for some of these courses, you must have students with specific training and professional development. So as we're looking to expand, and I so appreciate the work that you're doing in this area, Dr. McKnight, one of my favorite publications that the school system produces is the course catalog. And I'm wondering if, as we're producing that, we are doing a more clear job of showing pathways to access when a class isn't offered at a student's home school, if it's possible. So we have some, expanded programs that require, for instance, an academic transfer, but others, I think we're working to maybe make it possible for students to participate virtually in some appropriate courses. But if you don't know that opportunity exists, it's hard to take advantage of it. And I'm just sort of, thinking out loud about how we can make that course catalog a little easier to be a resource for people to understand how they can access any programs. Right now, it tends to just say this course is offered here, at these locations, but not necessarily that there are other ways for students not at those locations to potentially access them. And then I'm looking forward to Mr. Shahaste's comments about the magnet programs and how students are entered into those lottery programs. And I know we've been having lots of conversations about how the criteria that are used there. And so I'm not sure if we're going to have an update on that, but I believe the process for students entering into those magnets starts in a couple of months. So will we be getting somewhat of an overview, and especially for public consumption, about what that process is going to look like this year, to the extent that it's somewhat different than it has been the past couple of years now and then. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. I'll start backwards. With the last question that you asked, yes, we are happy to come forward and support our community with an understanding of that process and any updates. I think that's good, knowing that we're getting ready to go into the season. Let's have that information at the top of mind. I really appreciate your idea in regards to the course catalog. I mean, I've been somebody in the system for a while and have, utilized it as a staff member, a teacher. But in this space of priority number one, communicating to make sure we're establishing trust and relationship with parents, I think that's a great idea, to really look at the course catalog and help our community, our students and our families make connections to these course offerings and how they then kind of build that bridge to a lot of what they're still trying to figure out. So I will ask Dr. Murphy and Dr. Pugh to come together so that we can really take a look at that and make some updates, because that can be a really powerful communication tool with our community to help them understand the trajectory of where our students are going over their career. Thank you so much. I agree with everything you said in terms of sustainability. You know, I thought about this very much as, was it Ms. John? Yes, Ms. John mentioned this in her testimony. I compare it very much to what we were considering when we did water bottle filling stations, looking at the cost of what it would be to go back and, you know, make adjustments at current schools, but moving forward, thinking about how we would consider that in new construction. For the new Clarksburg Elementary School, I'll give that as an example of one that we right now are taking the steps to make sure there's a green roof. I think it was Snowden Farms that I visited some months ago. And I remember that was one proud moment. The staff wanted to make sure we went all the way up to the top, and I had a chance to see that green roof and how much pride they took in having that. So I agree this is where we're going for the future, to make sure we're taking care and doing our part to having a more sustainable environment in MCPS as well as the county. So we will continue to share with you and look at ways that we can make those updates moving forward, particularly in new construction, and then where we're able to go back and make adjustments. And to Mr. Miller, thank you again. It was so nice to walk into the room today. It was a very different look, a welcome look with the beautiful poinsettias. Please thank your students as well for this very thoughtful gift. It's just absolutely beautiful. I hope we're able to get a picture and send it to them to let them know that they decorated this room with lots of colorful decoration that makes all of us feel better, quite frankly, about the work that we're doing. But you're hearing that from gardener, fellow gardener as well, who believe that flowers just make everything better. So thank you.
Well, thank you to all our speakers. I think most of the things that I wanted to say have been covered. I just wanted to say thank you to Ms. Spurlock for her advocacy on sharing phonics information with families. We most certainly want our parents to be active partners in their children's education. And for Mr. Shashadi, if staff could take a close look at his recommendations in his testimony. As users of the system, parents always bring a very unique perspective to the work that we do, and it's very informative. So thank you again to all our speakers. We will now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item number 7. And Dr. McKnight is providing her recommendation today on the 2023-24 school year calendar for our adoption. I want to thank the policy committee and all of the staff who engaged the public and worked hard on these calendar options. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McKnight to proceed with the presentation.
So thank you, President Wolf.
Silvestre.
I'm sorry. President Silvestre.
Habits.
I tried so hard to make sure that did not happen today, and there I did it. But they were there to correct me immediately. And what makes it even more difficult is that Ms. Wolf is still to one side of me, but we will get there. Thank you, President Silvestre, for bringing up this item. I must say that I am very, very excited about us talking about the school calendar. Since the pandemic, we had so many conversations about how we have to look at things differently and in a very innovative way in thinking about all the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic. In addition to that, we've spent a lot of time talking about our students, where they are, and all the things that we have to do to support them. I just want to elevate. In the past, we really looked at the school calendar as an operational type item, and it still is. I mean, it really does direct what the school day, what the school year looks like. But I also want us to look at the power in what this calendar does to support the innovation that we all want, need, and we need to embrace. The other thing that I think is really important to consider when we think about calendar is, I believe that when it comes down to our children and how we have to serve them, we have so many things that are priorities, and to get one doesn't mean that we need to completely dismiss the other. And I really believe that the time that we think about that our students need and how that has to be taken into consideration for the calendar is one of the biggest lever points that can help us look at that in a very different and new way moving forward. So that's why I personally have been excited about us really looking at the 23-24 calendar for our traditional and innovative schools. I also want to thank our board members, Ms. Majowski. I know you're very much a part in helping to lead this process and working with the committee on the calendar, and really pushing in terms of thinking about we can give as much time as we possibly can to engage getting our community's input in this process. And I think that's so important as we continue to hear from our community, you know, how much time do you give us to actually be able to provide our input and perspective? And we always want to be able to honor that. Same for you, President Wolf, your leadership through the process of the school calendar over the time, and really thinking about the innovation, because you've continued to push in different ways to say, you know, the extracurricular activities and all those things, how does that marry up? So I wanted to highlight those examples because we've been talking about the school calendar and the things that influence it in so many different ways within the conversation about the school calendar and outside of conversations about the school calendar, but it all becomes really relative. So we were recently able to wrap up the survey data that we collected, and we had small community groups also coming together to give us input on the calendar, so that we were taking that into consideration. I also want to shout out our community when it comes down to giving feedback. So a few weeks ago, I was at I was going to say Macy's Thanksgiving, but it was not Macy's. It was the Thanksgiving Day Parade here in Silver Spring. It was our own Macy's. It was our own Macy's Parade. That's right. That is right, Ms. Rivera Oven. And our staff members are so committed to the work that they do and the success of our children. It continues to elevate. Now, here we are at the parade, you know, engaging with our community, and there were a number of teachers that were out there. And there's one, I remember her name, Miss Ryan. She's a teacher at Walter Johnson. And I remember as I was going over giving out candy, she introduced herself and she said, Dr. McKnight, you know, I just want you to, you know, hear from me. It's really important that we make sure we keep our calendar focused so that we're spending as much time with our students as possible. They need that time. I mean, my heart melted because here we are at a parade and we're celebrating so many things to be thankful for, but she thought it was so important for her to take that moment that we had to be able to share that with me. And I want to thank Miss Ryan. I'm sure she is teaching, but anyone who knows Miss Ryan, and then she followed up with an email to me as well, which I always appreciate. I just want to say our staff is really committed to making sure we're taking all the things into consideration to help them do their jobs well, which ultimately then helps us impact our students in a positive way. So with that, our calendar really does provide an instructional roadmap overall for students in their learning, and we've talked about the importance of us staying focused on that. So this school calendar does bring about some balance, okay? As we talk about this calendar, there are some perspectives that we've continued to hear over time. We've heard from our community, we've also heard from our staff members that half days are not the most pleasurable days for the logistic planning of it, and it's not the most meaningful for students for instruction. And so we've taken that into consideration. Now, I'll go to last year. We had an increase of half days last year for a number of different circumstances. But this has been a different, better, more stable year, and so we've taken that into consideration of balancing what it is that we're required to do to honor our negotiated agreements, and thinking about what are some options that allow us to provide the best environment for our students. So we've also taken into consideration learning from our anti-racist audit. What are the things there that we need to take into consideration of the school calendar? Also, Blueprint for Maryland's Future. That talks about us prioritizing professional learning for staff. And this is a perfect example of it can't be either or. It actually has to be all of it. We need our students in school to honor the time that they need to focus on learning, but we also must pay close attention to the professional development that we are providing for staff. We all know the best conduit to our students receiving a positive public education that is geared toward the needs of their learning that best benefits them is having a person, a teacher, adults who are well taken care of in their professional learning that can provide the best service to that student. So that also has to be taken into consideration. So with that said, I take great confidence in the fact that we've come up with a really good solution. One, in the ways that we've looked at our calendar, but one that doesn't come new to you, which is the conversation I presented to the system 3 years ago, which was the Out of School Time Initiative. Because I felt like that was going to be the answer, or one of the ways, there's never one single answer, but one of the ways that would help solve our problem. And that was to be able to provide the opportunity for our students to continue to learn in many different ways, academic enrichment in a number of different ways, and we have so many community partners who help us do that, but also having them engaged and being addressed on those days that our teachers then are taking care of their professional learning. That way our community does not have to be concerned about what type of benefit is my child getting on this day that teachers are taking care of their learning. Well, we're going to try to compensate for that. And we have the power to do that with so many different partners in Montgomery County, who our students have, I call them our partners, the extension of learning from Montgomery County Public Schools. It's where our students learn what the real world is like in the workforce. They go out and are able to participate in all types of things. Why is the word escaping me now? When they go on the job and thank you. Internships, where they're able to go out and do different internships, apprenticeships, and all of those things to help them be prepared to come back into the economy of Montgomery County Public Schools. So with that said, I just want to share those things with you because as the calendar is presented, I want you to balance that perspective around out of school time, taking care of teacher professional learning, taking into consideration the adjustment of the half days and how we want it to be a meaningful opportunity for our students, and also addressing the things that our community have said are important to them and how we design this. So we're excited about the opportunity to extend professional development even in this calendar, not just to our professional staff, but to our supporting staff. They're just as important and need to ensure that the system is doing everything to make sure that they're getting what they need. So I have a lot of confidence, much confidence in the school calendar recommendation, as you've heard from my perspective in terms of why we've shared what we are sharing with you. I also want to thank Ms. Edwards and Mr. Hollis. They have been very involved in the community and really stewarding this process through so that we could take all of those things into consideration along with the vision of how we want to marry these priorities in the system. So with that, I want to thank them, and I am pleased to turn the conversation over to Ms. Edwards and Mr. Hollis to engage us. Oh, and I'm sorry, to Mr. Hall, who's going to give us some comments before he releases it over to the staff to get into the weeds of the content. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. McKnight. And I'll turn it over to the team here in just a minute to walk through the calendar. We're very excited to share this. But I just wanted to take a minute to thank the team. There's been a lot of hard work that has gone into this, the Policy Management Committee, and everyone else who has provided input and feedback on the calendar. You know, we always hear a lot about the starting of school and the ending of school, and that's very important. But we've also heard a lot this year around making sure that there's as much uninterrupted learning time for students as possible, additional PD days, not just for our teachers, but for all of our staff, fewer early release days, as a superintendent highlighted, along with some innovative components that we're adding to the calendar that will help meet some of those goals. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of those aspects and thank everyone who has participated in this process. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Edwards.
Good afternoon again. If we could pull up the slide deck, everyone, and just to echo, just very excited to sit here as we go to the next slide to really bring before you today the superintendent's recommended 2023-2024 calendar. And as we constructed this calendar to bring it forward for approval, we did work with several of our community members, and including the Policy Management Committee, who was absolutely wonderful, and we were here with the board in October. Our calendar that we bring forward to you today is really nestled in the board strategic plan, and we had to take the opportunity to really have the perspective of our community and really do some really ingrained engagement, and I think you will hear that as we come to you today, just reviewing what we've done within that month's time frame. In addition, the board's priorities are really focusing on improving math and literacy skills. This calendar is about instruction. It's about instruction for students, and it's about instruction for staff that really will give us the foundation that we need for the future to really create that school climate for everyone to feel as though that they are definitely going to be successful. Next slide. The process that we used to get to today really creates a platform so that the 182 days that we provide students really creates appropriate instructional time for them to learn and show mastery. There's also embedded intentionality for us as a district to focus on the tenets of the anti-racist audit that came out that we have to have time in order to really be purposeful about, as well as the work of the blueprint. Throughout this presentation, we will focus on the essential questions of the board and really being able to provide you that structure, that framework to understand how the work that we're bringing forward will help catapult us for next school year and be the best that we could offer for our students, staff, as well as our families. Highlighted, you'll see in, well, it's not in teal anymore, but I'll point it out to you. But since September, this is almost like a really good build-up. We started the year really understanding how our students were performing. We looked at student data, our evidence of learning. And so we had an idea of how our students ended the year. We understood the learning that needed to take place this year. In October, we stopped to hear about the anti-racist audit report and really understood the critical spaces that we need to focus on. We've highlighted in the calendar the places in which we can do that. And then in October, we had an opportunity to discuss with the Policy Management Committee as well as with the full board about the school year calendar and receive some feedback at that point. And that's aligned with Policy IDA. And in November, we heard about the blueprint. So as we come to you today after our Special Policy Management Committee in November with our recommendation, all of the things that the board has talked about throughout this year should be reflective in some way in terms of the structure, in terms of the recommendation that we have created for next year. So when we do this right, when we create that calendar and the way in which we believe that we had to meet those needs, it will provide the academic and professional needs within the school system. It does set the optimal conditions for student and professional learning, and we would really like to take the opportunity to be able to open it up for you today. If we look at the next slide, as we discussed today, we'll give you some insight around our community engagement that we've had. And we'll talk to you about how we did a survey, but we saw gaps in the information that we received from the survey, and we needed to have some direct conversations with many of our community members to make sure that we were not losing perspective. In addition, we'll also highlight specifically the calendar priorities and share with you the recommended calendar for the traditional, which would be all of our schools, and then our innovative school calendar for our COLA and NICS elementary schools. And then we will turn it over to the board for discussion as well as the resolution. I'd like to ask Mr. Hollis at this time to share the community engagement and the trends from the interactions so that the board will be able to hear our process, but also to hear the perspectives that were brought forward.
Next slide. So this, we just lay out once again for you the process of what we've done through developing our calendar. 3 phases: gathering of interest, developing scenarios, and then finally receiving feedback and getting us to today. Presenting for you a traditional and innovative school calendar recommendation. I believe that the biggest piece when we think about the 3 phases is phase 1 of gathering interest is something that we've kind of done ad hoc in the past, but something that we have not formalized in the way that we did this year. And so we did put out a survey to the public in October, 19,000 responses, and that's a big number. And for those of you all who've watched survey data in MCPS, 19,000 individuals responding and saying, these are the things we're interested in seeing. And so we heard them say, maybe we should have a calendar that starts us a little bit earlier. Maybe we should have a calendar that has more breaks, particularly around Thanksgiving or Christmas, or maybe even in February. Maybe we should have a calendar that allows us to have a greater opportunity for professional development. These are the things that we were hearing. That's what led us to the development of the scenarios. We heard comments today in our public comments around how some of those scenarios did not feel like they were best with regard to balancing the instructional needs of the school system, but it's one of the things we wanted to be true and honest to what we had heard in our feedback and include those as part of the process. And then once we got those scenarios, we had opportunity to have discussions in this room and also with our community and through community responding through an additional survey, which we just closed, that was available November 3rd through November 30th. And so that has provided us an opportunity to really give us an opportunity to provide our calendar scenarios and recommendation for today. So we'll go to the next slide. On this slide, I just want to point out a few things. So when we put the scenarios out there, over 10,000 people responded. And so that is up from nearly 4,300 people last year. And so that's a big number. The other thing I really want to point out on this slide is I included the demographic information. And as much as the percentages matter, and we don't believe we're there yet, but at the same time, we think it's important for us to look at the end. It's important to look at the number. Because when you begin to look at the number, what you will notice is while I don't feel like I heard enough from some communities, I do see some numbers that say maybe we are headed in the right direction. And so when you begin to look at that, that's when you say, maybe there is some hope here. Our employee responses is up for over 400% from last year. Our student response number is up over almost 1,000% from last year. Our Asian response for students, individuals who identify as Asian, is up 100%. The Black and Hispanic Latino numbers are up almost 100% as well from last year. And so the percentages tell one story, but I think it's also important that we put out a survey the same amount of time, 4 weeks, around the same time of year last year. And what you do find is there is more engagement from certain communities than there was last year. Is there more work to do? Absolutely. And that's why we took the calendar on the road. We had targeted group sessions and small group meetings with a lot of individuals to make sure that we could hear more voices as well as from representative groups that we had not heard from before. And so I just want to highlight that for you all as well. I just think it's a critical point, and as we begin to look at the data, data can show you many different things, but we think it's important that we just note that as well. Next slide. And so as I mentioned, as we had a survey that was up and available to the public, we also simultaneously had work that we were walking through in terms of meeting with a lot of groups. And so we spent more than 25 hours, 1 hour sessions with over 1,100 participants. I think Mr. Kim, the students, I will say, brought large groups. And so, and he already had meetings where they were already set up. Jeff Sullivan in athletics had a group of student leaders. We were able to get to that group and really present some scenarios and opportunities for them to give impacts. But we had a lot of parent groups. We had community groups from various ethnic and religious backgrounds. And we've listed those here for you. But just wanted to let you know that these are pieces that we thought were critical to our engagement. As much as we care about the qualitative has to be seen on equal planes with it. And what we have provided in our next slide, and so if we can turn to the next slide, are some of the trends that we saw. And these trends are representative of the combination. It's the combination of what I saw in quantitative data as well as what we saw in qualitative data. And so when you begin to look at this, you will see that professional development and our commitment to that is something that people really spoke highly about and spoke about a lot and said there is a need here. And as Dr. McKnight stated earlier, but there was a desire for balance. And so you'll see that next real big topic that came up is consistency and predictability. Ms. Yang participated in one of the small group sessions, and that was one of the main points she asked me. She just said, Doug, there's a lot of days that we're out, right? And so the idea of providing that as part of the consistency that families are looking for, but also teachers. And I think there are many educators in this room and listening, and they know what it is to ramp up and then say, I got good momentum with my students, and then all of a sudden, there's a day away. And so providing those opportunities and consistency was huge for folks. We also heard about breaks. There wasn't a great voice out there around we need to have more breaks or longer breaks, but people did speak about the balance. And when we do have those breaks, are there out-of-school opportunities, rich and varied and available for communities to really engage in? And so I think those are some of the critical pieces. I also just want to highlight that when folks selected, whatever scenario they selected of those over 10,000 folks, what the community really said to us is what most influenced my decision is the first and last day of the school year. And so almost 60% of the of folks who surveyed and responded stated that. And so I think those are the critical aspects around the community feedback. I'm sure you all may have more questions around this when we get to the discussion period. But right now, we'll turn it back over to Mrs. Edwards, and she'll talk about a little bit around the innovation and some of the professional development opportunities and other pieces we're looking at.
Okay, thank you very much. Next slide, please. So one of the critical parts that we've discussed from the very beginning is really about the purity of professional development, and really taking that opportunity within next year's calendar structure to be able to do that. What we've heard in the anti-racist audit that really helps us to be able to provide this time within the calendar to do it come from under Domain 1, school culture, of really creating a district-wide system to build the internal capacity of staff to facilitate conversations about race and dismantling racism. And so that takes time. It takes an opportunity for us to stop and to be able to have those conversations. And we see some of the professional development days that we are recommending within the calendar being able to help us to do that. In addition, also creating the opportunity to really think about how staff are trained to teach different racial groups with histories and the nuance and the cultural sensitivity that's there. The blueprint from the Maryland Blueprint under Pillar 2, high quality and diverse teachers and leaders, really creates an opportunity, and it highlights that teachers must have time for professional learning and collaboration during the day. And so we want to focus on what we can offer that's already within our structure, not really bridging into that after school time and or that weekend time for people, and really making it critical. For the next slide. So last year, if many of you remember, I led the Out of School Time program pilot, and Byron is here, and one of his nicknames for me was the Queen of Out of School Time. So even though I've taken that crown off, I still have a very big passion for it in my heart. And so this calendar gives us that opportunity to blend the best of both worlds together. And so as we think about Out of School Time last year, during that pilot, we learned that our elementary school students, on days where we either had professional development days, early release days, during winter break, we provided our students opportunities to experience activities at the Soccerplex, Black Rock. In addition, many of our middle school students did arts on the block. They did items with our Montgomery County Department of Rec. And so we offered a plethora of opportunities that were free of charge to students. And that was critical, because if we were going to be out of school, our families have a continuum. Many of our families are very excited that their children are out and they can spend time with them. They can cultivate different activities. Then we have some families where the question comes into, what does my child do during the day while I either have to go to work or I have other commitments? And so if we need to create time within our school day to be able to really focus on the needs of our staff, we want to make sure that we take care of our community as well. And so the Out of School Time will be able to provide us the opportunity to do that. So right now in MCPS, moving into next year, we have this awesome opportunity to build the future in a more creative way through our calendar that doesn't neglect students, staff, or families. We have to create multiple opportunities at once. And as we think about Out of School Time for the coming year, in the recommended calendar, we seek to do a couple of things. We want to increase the number of professional development opportunities for staff. We also want to provide students with quality activities when school is not occurring. And we want to decrease the concerns of families. And so on the chart on the right, you'll see a sample of what we're kind of conceptualizing and we'll be working to design for the coming year. Of the 6 additional PD days that we've included in the recommended calendar, there are going to be 3 that we're looking at that are specifically designated where we'll have district-wide out-of-school time days. And we're looking to specialize it by level. So in the sample schedule, for example, on one day, we'll have our elementary school students who will have an opportunity to attend out-of-school time activities within the community. And all of our elementary school teachers will receive professional development by level. Our middle school students and our high school students will have a regular day of work, as will their staff members, as well as their teachers and other staff members within the building. And so that will create the opportunity not only for the PD to occur, but having, sometimes there are things that at each individual level that you need that are specific, that are different than other levels. The cost that, as we look at this, is we want it to continue to be free for students and families. We want to provide transportation, and we want to be able to continue to use our ESSER funds to be able to support these opportunities for children. And so when we go through the specifics of the recommended calendar, you will see specific days where we've identified as district-wide out-of-school time days, that there'll be different experiences at different times for staff as well as students. And so we're really excited to bring that forward as an opportunity for our students.
Next slide.
Mr. Hollis, before you go on, just one other point I wanted to mention. As we share the examples of all of the activities that would be provided for students in out of time, some of it sounded very enriching, but we're also going to be providing academic options for students as well. I just wanted to make sure we emphasize that so that our community understands that, you know, the option is to be able to have choices and to be able to have those choices meet the needs of what our students need during that time. Thank you.
And it's all free, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for saying that, Ms. Mandrowski. Yes, no cost to our community.
So next, we'll walk through the calendar recommendation. Here are the highlights for our traditional school year calendar. 182 days of instruction, 2 more than what is required by the state of Maryland, but something that we have been able to do in MCPS for a while now. First day of school will be Monday, August the 28th, which is where we have fallen this year as well, the last Monday of August. And then the end of the school year would be June the 13th. Which puts us close to where we are this year, but a little bit earlier. We really like when we're able to get out within those first 2 weeks of June. And so our calendar, even with all the other offerings that we believe we've offered this year, allows us to do that. There is a focus on professional development, as Mrs. Edwards has just spoken of, particularly related to these 3 district-wide PD days on the calendar, and we'll show you the graphic in one moment. Here it does refer to PDI. That really details professional development and instruction. And so, as she stated, one level of school, one level of our students and staff will be experiencing professional development and enrichment opportunities, while the rest of our levels are experiencing traditional instructional days. And so that is what we will find on the calendar. Additionally, we have also found a day on the calendar pending some budget approval, but we think it's important, particularly with what we saw from the anti-racist audit, that all staff, and it doesn't matter what your job or role is in MCPS, has a certain professional development, particularly around findings from the anti-racist audit. And so that will be an addition as well, and something good for our staff. Also, while we're speaking of staff, it has been brought up a few times to this body, but also is something that we've heard in our discussions around just the opportunity of consistent pay schedules for all staff members. There have been interruptions or pieces where there were work periods that only had a couple days or 5 days or 7 days, when 10 is what individuals who are hourly workers expected. This year we had, I think, 8 pay periods in which staff members had 10 days on a paycheck. Next year's calendar and what we're presenting today has 11 of days like that, and so that's up 3. We also have reduced the number that is less than 9. I think this year we have 5 times in which there's less than 9 days of pay on a paycheck, and next year it will only be 3 like that. And so 2 of them are unavoidable. That's always the case around spring break and winter break, but just want to highlight that we've been intentional about that and heard that. Our Thanksgiving break, our spring break are about the same. Winter break, we did take 1 more day after the new year, and you'll see that in a minute. So if we go to the next slide, we'll walk through some of the dates and particulars on the slide. One of the things I often say about the calendar is it's a calendar of colors. And so I'll begin with the blues. There is a light blue and there's a dark blue. All of the things in blue are required. If it's light blue, it's a state mandated holiday. If it's dark blue, it is something that we have negotiated in our contracts. It refers to our grading and planning days that follow the end of each quarter. In those dark blues, we also have changed the designation there, so you will see GP instead of, in the past, it has said professional development as well. We want to name it what it is. It is grading and planning days, and so staff can participate in those days accordingly in those dark blue days. The other piece I'll point out is October the 9th, and we still have planning around the innovative aspects of professional development as well as system-wide professional development, but we wanted to provide the opportunity. We've circled October the 9th and thought to ourselves, this looks like the perfect time to really focus in on the anti-racist audit, professional development, and an opportunity for all staff to have professional development in the very beginning of the school year. And then you'll see some other dates here, November the 10th, February the 15th, as well as May the 15th. They all are dates in which are the professional development instructional days, which Mrs. Edwards has referred to with regard to the out-of-school time, where some of our students and staff will be doing one thing while others will do others. While those are 3 days, I also want to say they are a part of our instructional count, and that's because of conversations Dr. McKnight has continued to have with our state superintendent that has allowed us the opportunity to do that. And so this is something that the state superintendent is excited about. We're excited about the opportunity to innovate, and so our team will be working and planning these things over the next several months to make sure that our community has all the details. But those are the biggest pieces here. The other piece I'll just point out are early release dates. There are less of them. There are 2 that are mandated by our contracts, one in the first term and one in the third term, and so those are available there. And so we just want to make sure that those pieces are there for us to make sure that we really see and see an opportunity for less time. The last thing is the color white is a color. And so on this calendar, I just want to note that when you look at September, there are a long stretch of consecutive days. In October, once you get past that professional development day, that pending budget approval will be additional just $1.4 million. You will see nearly 4 weeks of consecutive instruction. When you get to December and really the end of November, from Thanksgiving break to winter break, there are no breaks. We go to school, we work, we teach, we learn. And I think it's important because we continue to hear that from our community. You'll see that again in March. You'll see a long stretch there of 3 weeks. You'll see it again in May, the end of April headed into May. And so we just want to highlight that as well. Often we look at all the other colors, but I want us also to emphasize on the white that's a part of this calendar as well. Next slide. Next, I just want to point out the innovative school year calendar. When we recommend every year, we do make sure that we bring both calendars together. Really want to highlight and commend the staff and the committee that works at Arcola and Roscoe Nitz and their work with Nichelle Owens and that division of early childhood recovery in Title I. They meet on a regular basis, always planning for the innovative school year, thinking about the right way to approach their community, to give instruction, etc. All along, they've made time for us to discuss the calendar. Additionally, they have also created additional meetings to talk about the calendar. They've emphasized to their community the importance of participating in our calendar surveys, and then they've had their own kind of feedback sessions around that. And so some of the dates you see here, the Monday, July 10th, as a preference for a start date, and what we will find in the recommendation is really comes from that community. It's the 4th of July week has just caused challenges around folks going back to school, starting again, et cetera. And so let's start clean on Monday, July 10th. And that really comes from that community. Their last day of school will be the same as ours, as the traditional school year on Thursday, June the 13th. They do also have a little break before the traditional school year starts. And so they'll go to school from July 10th to August the 11th, and then there is a break period in which they'll have 2 weeks to just kind of catch their breath, make sure they're ready, and then they'll start in stride again when the traditional school year kicks off. And so those pieces are very important, and just really want to highlight that. If we go to the next slide, you will see the graphic here. And this is the graphic. The only thing that I would really point out that's notable here is there are more early release days in the innovative calendar. It's traditionally something that we have allowed for that team to do because there's just so many different factors that they're working with. And so they do have those, and they have figured out a right rhythm in the way that they have communicated that to their staff and families, but also the way to use those days in a way that they are really preparing for their students in the next stretch of instruction. And so there are 17 early release days. In years past, they've been at 20 and above, and so 17 is still lower. And in the middle of the school year, from August the 28th through June the 10th, June the 13th, they follow the traditional calendar just the same as us. And so we just really wanted to point out this and just show you this graphic. Most of the things from August to June look exactly the same, except you will see a couple of more early release days with that group. I'll now give it to Mrs. Edwards to round out the presentation and then give us an opportunity for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Hollis, and thank you for naming the beautiful color white on the calendar as instruction. So as we conclude today, and if we go to the next slide, I just do want to highlight some key takeaways from the superintendent's recommended calendar. This calendar provides 3 key areas. The first one is really instruction, PD for staff, and innovation that speaks to the recommendations that we have all heard and know from the anti-racist audit, as well as the what we must address and our structures in order to really be able to lift up the blueprint. The second component, as a former middle school principal and as a former middle school English teacher, I'm excited about continuous instruction being on that calendar and the possibilities of what it means for students in terms of what they can learn and experience, spending time with their peers, for staff, and what it says to families in terms of our commitment to their child, as well as for them to know what to do on a daily basis. The professional development opportunities are there. We've increased by 4 additional opportunities for the coming year, and we've been able to highlight those within the calendar, and that's our commitment to really thinking about the needs of our staff within the district. The one thing when we think about the cycle of what staff need, retention speaks to when people feel like we've watered them. We've provided them the skills that they need in order to grow and to feel connected to the district, and we've embedded those components within the calendar. And then finally, of course, the innovation through the out-of-school time opportunities. So our charge every day in Montgomery County Public Schools is to provide a child a quality education, and we believe the superintendent's 23-24 recommended budget creates the structure to do so. Board President Silvestri, I turn it over to you for questions and discussion from the board.
Thank you. Really excellent presentation and a really good process all along the way. In my 4 years on the board, I've really seen this process evolve. We don't have people coming to testify against it as we had early in my tenure. But I just wanted to clarify something before I open it up for questions to my colleagues. With the innovative school calendar, the 17 half-days, if I remember correctly, those schools have out-of-school time programs to make that up, so it's not a burden on families.
Absolutely, yes.
Yep, so that's already taken into consideration. Those two schools, kids have somewhere to go after school. So please turn on your lights if you would like to ask a question. Ms. Rivera-Oven? And if we could get Ms. Harris on the screen so we can see if she has any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for, this was great for a newbie. That's what I'm going to say. But I do have some concerns on the responses and communities of color not being well represented. So you mentioned, actually, I think with the Latino population, there was a 100% increase from last year, which even made me sadder than seeing the results, which meant they were pretty much non-existent last year, in a sense. So, especially with Black and Brown students being the largest population, okay? And surveys are very critical to making decisions for students and also for the participation of parents. I just want to hear from you guys, what are your plans for future engagement? Because as a former parent, right, of a high schooler and somebody who works very much in the front lines with the community, we saw this a lot during the pandemic with how to reach communities of color, and the formula that I had proposed for many, many decades, including in the blueprint that we had with the Latino Health Initiative Committee, was to go to communities and to also think outside the box of tools. The traditional sometimes routes of emails and so on are not sometimes the best way to get feedback from communities. One tool that we use a lot is WhatsApp. We do a lot of things in the community, especially during the holidays. We are very present in the sense that not everybody is IT tech, has a computer, has broadband access. So for me, the voices of these communities is very important, not just here, but also in different ways that we might be in the future engaging. So when I see 44 Latinos taking place in this survey, that's not even one student per school. And then when I see some of the groups, like isn't there like a Latino student advisory group or an employee Latino advisory group, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. And I don't see them on there. It just, it concerns me. Because one of the things that I know that is in Dr. McKnight's plan is that two-way communication with parents and the school system. That to me is vital, especially after coming out of a pandemic, because we had lost so much time that we're never going to be able to get back to get some of these kids caught up. So anything that we can do to improve that. So I'm just curious to hear from you guys. What do you have in store for future engagements and ensuring that this happens?
Thank you for your question. And I think you highlighted a key point that as the survey results were coming in, even though the numbers were higher, the demographics were all the same. And so one of the things Mr. Hollis highlighted was just the simultaneous opportunity to engage with the stakeholder groups that are identified here. And even though they're not all of our stakeholders, I think we have an opportunity to continue to build out. Once the calendar is passed, the one thing we have not done that I sit here and reflect on, because when I came to central office, I started with building the calendar several years ago, is kind of testing the calendar throughout the year and going and engaging with different groups, but from the standpoint of how is it working for you? And what are the things that we need to consider as we get ready to build the next set of the calendar? And so as we did our engagement with the groups that are listed here, that's why I wanted to take an opportunity to sit down and have conversations, to ask questions, to gain feedback. The one area that we do have to build on in terms of an upgrade is really capturing from each of those individual spaces how many people attended, and specifically what their affiliation is, whether it be parent, community member, in terms of how they actually fit into the system, so that we can maintain track of it, so that we're coming back to not only to the same people, but we're also expanding as well. So even though we did this simultaneously, and the 1,100 does not compare to the number of surveys, it is a stepping stone for us to consider, but it's also an opportunity for us to start in September and really thinking about how the calendar is being implemented and the perception and the perspective of others.
If I may, I want to add on to what Ms. Edwards has shared, Ms. Rivera-Oven, because what I hear you asking in your question is, what are we going to do differently moving forward? So I want to say two things. One, this year, in my leadership cabinet, one of my investments was I'm looking over Ms. Elba Garcia, who is sitting behind Mr. Stockton, because the purpose of that position was to be able to figure out who are the key components that we're galvanizing in our community to participate in all of the system's work. So one of the things I am directing the staff to do is to continue to work with Ms. Elba Garcia in all community outreach engagements, so that we can see the benefit of what that outreach looks like. We've also engaged some of our community fellows in different spaces, in the business community, in government, in several who we have working with the school system, who are also conduits to helping us make sure that we are being very intentional in terms of how we need to engage, where do we need to go that we haven't been, and how do we get, most importantly, the community to see what happens when they engage and what happens when they don't, so that they are motivated to do so. But for us then to maybe look at how we shift our systems to get that input from them. For some it may be going out to other places. We've done so many things during the pandemic that we can't get lost on us. We recognize about our community. We know where our community members are. They're in different places that provide services that are important to them, whether it may be health services, vaccination, all those types of things. They are in places in which they worship around faith. We know that they're in places in which they go and get means of information that's important to them outside of the school system. And so continuing to look at how we then go to those places, and not that the work that the school system is trying to be, that we're trying to do is done just in our space. So those are just a few things that I will say that are specific to how we are moving forward to look at the outreach. Because we know that every time we send out a survey, what we can anticipate coming back. So that means starting from how we engage and really working with others to help us do that outside of the work that we do is key. So I appreciate you raising that, and look forward to us proactively sharing with you as a board and our community how we're doing that, and if we in fact see benefits from that, from utilizing Ms. Garcia, utilizing our community fellows and others who we've engaged in partnership with to help us work with the community. Thank you.
Ms. Harris?
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to say, as a former teacher and a former CTE teacher particularly, I really do appreciate the reduction in early release days, because, and I will make my annual pitch to think about maybe reversing the change on those 2 early release days in November that are typically associated with the parent-teacher conference days for elementary and middle schools. When I started teaching at Edison, those early release days were limited to elementary and middle schools. And then during my tenure teaching, they started to incorporate high schools. And the early release days are really damaging to the programs at Edison, because it's hard to keep all students on track when some students are getting zero instruction on multiple days and others are getting supposedly full instruction. So that's my pitch. But I do have a question looking at slide 10, which is discussing the new category of professional development and instruction, those 3 new days. And I find I'm confused. And so my clarifying question is, I think based on the example that Ms. Edwards discussed, that we put these 3 days, November 10, February 15, and May 15 into the calendar, worked with this MSDE to get them counted as instructional days. But each of those days are limited to one instructional level. So one of those 3 days is an elementary school professional development and instructional days. One is middle school and one is high school. Is that what I'm understanding?
Ms. Harris, that is correct.
Good. Now I don't feel so stupid. Now, my question too is, since we are getting, MSD is allowing us to count these as instructional days, how is that, what kinds of opportunities will our middle and high school students be expected to participate as alternatives to regular instruction so that they're counted as instructional days at those levels?
Good question, Ms. Harris. As we design this program or design this to be more specific for those particular days, we will be engaging with our students to learn of some of their interests. However, in some of our feedback that we received from students last year, as well as some of the activities they participated in. At the middle school level, they did fine arts programs. They also did recreational-based programs, but there were also academic enrichment programs for students to participate in. We also had connections with Montgomery County Libraries as well as the Smithsonian. At the high school level last year, when we offered out-of-school time opportunities, we utilized the College Tracks program. That was a really good program for our students to be able to use. In addition, we also had a few companies outside of the state of Maryland that worked with us that focused on career development. They talked about resume writing, they gave interview skills, and students were able to interact with this company virtually to be able to do that. So that created a larger number of spaces for people to be able to sign in and do that. So we want it to be age appropriate, of course, but we also need to make sure that it's interest based so that we definitely have the maximum participation of the student body.
Thank you. I'll be interested to see how those partnerships develop, because I think they're important to the work that we're doing in lots of ways. And I guess the last question I have is, since we're counting these as instructional days for MSDE purposes, but we're not requiring students to actually do anything on their level school's day, how is that balance working out with the state?
So as we design the program, we will be looking at how we capture the attendance, and I think one of the biggest components is we really want to make sure that this is something that our students want to be involved with. We will work closely in being able to give our recommendations in terms of the structure to the state to make sure that it meets the definite qualifications that they have.
Okay. So in essence, we're looking at what we're doing with the school calendar this year with this category, this professional development and instruction category. We're kind of piloting an approach that possibly, based on how it works in Montgomery County and the scat around it, could be used by other systems, other LEAs in Maryland.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. So this is actually at the very beginning of planning. I just want to say that this is something that Montgomery County is looking to pilot next year. The reason we wanted to have the conversation of what we wanted to accomplish in the frame of the school calendar is we wanted you to have a high-level overview of the vision of it. I think what I would propose is that we come back to the board to give another update on all the services and how we're going to communicate with the community and provide them choice and perspective and the options in the out-of-school time initiative so that we can get into the particulars of that. Yes, the goal is that we see many great benefits from this pilot that will inform others locally and nationally, so that we, as an education collective overall, acknowledge that we don't have to take away one thing to serve the need of another. And in this case, professional development for our teachers, while also being able to provide continued learning for our students. I just tend to be biased in my perspective that in Montgomery County, we have such a rich community of those who are available of services that can teach our children that in many cases, we're unique in that way. And I just feel like because we're able to do that as a system, then let's do that.
Dr. McKnight, in follow-up to what you just said, the when you bring that back, can you include in that how much or how we're going to let parents know which days are for their kids? And
yes.
And I would just recommend that maybe instead of writing professional development and instruction, maybe write continued, instruction continues or something, so people don't see it and automatically think it's not their kids.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Majowski. And any other questions that may come to mind in terms of what are the specific things that we want to make sure we communicate to our community will be helpful to us. When we initially talked about coming back to share the specifics of this, we talked about coming back in the spring so that we would have a chance to have a public discussion about it. Although we would be months away from the fall at that point where we would be getting ready to implement, that gives our community enough time to be able to plan and know what's coming on those days.
I was going to go to Mr. Kim, then I'll come back.
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted to ask about next steps for driving community engagement. Certainly for school year calendars of the future. So I appreciate the answer to that question. But I just wanted to add that I do think that there is tremendous value in this quantitative, qualitative approach, and thoroughly appreciate that mentality of using those stakeholder groups to really target any gaps in value that you might have found in the survey. But at the same time, I think every piece of information to aid the school system and the board in decision making should really be as reflective of our community as possible. So I just wanted to say that to underline the importance of prioritizing and ensuring that those survey results are reflective of our demographics here in Montgomery County. Certainly in all of our work in engaging the community, but especially for the school year calendar, which is something so tangible and accessible to students. I know for a fact that it's certainly not a lack of students out there who have their opinions that may be causing these results in the survey. Even if it's knocking on doors or showing up to the lunchrooms with a computer or even paper surveys, I'm confident that we have this vast network of students who are readily available to share their input and could really guide the work of the board and getting out there, working hard to have data that accurately reflects our community is of great importance. So I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
Mr. Kim, if I may, I think one of the lessons that we learned this year, one is we did 2 surveys, doing one in October, which doesn't have us right at the deadline of December. We saw that we got 19,000 responses, right? And so as much as I love the November roadshow of going and seeing how many meetings I can have and us trying to engage, I think what Mrs. Edwards spoke to is how do we do this and we're less time bound, right? And so if we are having these conversations while people are experiencing, I think to Ms. Rivera-Oven's earlier statement as well as yours, I think that does provide an opportunity that, yes, I may do a quantitative survey that is a moment of time, but I also could do the qualitative work in a way that's more integrated throughout the year. And I think that would allow us to knock on a few more doors and sit at different tables.
And I appreciate you bringing up school lunch. So, love the cafeteria idea.
Ms. Yang?
Yeah. Thank you so much. First, I want to just the sheer number increase and the thoughtfulness you approach this calendar. I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate the policy committee under the leadership of Mrs. Smondrowski input on this calendar process. A few things. We mentioned some future engagement. Dr. McKnight mentioned about meeting communities where they are, the locations, cafeterias, place of worship. I also want to mention about time. There's certain time of the years that our certain communities gather more during that time of the year. So are we looking at the calendar only October to December, or can we broaden it? I don't know. So I come back to the staff. Maybe that can be a consideration in your future community engagement.
No, I appreciate that consideration because with policy IDA, I think that the time block has typically been, from the summer months leading up until this point.
Right.
But it does create an opportunity to, once the fall begins, to hear from people just in terms of their experience, but then also to gather, and then throughout the summer. So I know that the pools are very popular as well, and those are locations, but that is a divergent and different way to approach them, especially for this project. Thank you.
Okay. And the second question I have is, I appreciate that the thoughtfulness we place in looking at including our supporting professionals, SEIU members, in the professional days, training days, and really consider the impact of no school on the pay schedule, pay period, on their income, those impact. But I would like us to think even further in the question of equity in our school systems. I know that at times, maybe not this particular years, in the past, that when we consider whether to designate a day for professional day is because who can show up to work and how many staff member can be at work that day. But then that also create equity questions, right? We don't have the most diverse workforce yet. We are striving to be more diverse. So in our consideration, we need to continue to ask our policies, who does it leave out in our practices of those calendars? So that's all my comment. Thank you so much.
Ms. Wolf?
I just want to thank you for your work on this. I know it's been a tremendous effort. And I also want to channel something Ms. Mandrowski always says, or I want to ask you a question about it, and that is, did this go out as a text? Because I have to tell you, I hate surveys. So if you send it on an email, you're most likely going to get it deleted from me, quite frankly. But if you send it on this text, it's going to be bothersome because every time I look at the text, there it is. And so I'm being very serious. I really start to think that while we don't have a system in place that allows us necessarily to do that just yet, that we really need to start thinking about that, because there are days that go by that I don't look at my home email. And like I say, if there's a survey on it, it gets deleted. But I don't know how many questions were on the survey, but I just know if you did it in a text in 5 clicks or less, I'm most likely going to look at it and answer it. Because I know if you send it to the students as a text, you will get a response.
So to respond, you're absolutely right, Ms. Wolf, and we started to do that. And so we did send text message out, we did see it. We sent it also in languages that were folks that identified as their first language. And so that also, we did, and we saw an increase in responses immediately. We also provided flyers that had a QR code at them. They were available and up in schools during our student conferences right before Thanksgiving, but also in events like the Latin dance event, Dr. Sullivan with the student athletes. He had some events. He also had those on the paper. Shella Cherry did the same thing. And so having those available in those ways are some of the improvement. I will also say that our communications team, in helping us do that, as well as helping us make the survey available in all languages. And then also just thinking about the way that we are using social media, Instagram, Twitter, others, in I think a more consistent way has helped us as well. And that may be some of what we're seeing in the increase in numbers. But as you've stated, we've just got to continue to strategize around this and think about the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think so, because a lot of our parents are just too busy to go online and do a survey. But I also heard something that Ms. Edwards said that I think is very important, and that is continuous feedback. I think if you do continuous feedback, that you'll be that much further ahead when it comes time. And lastly, I want to say, if the policy only has a certain window of time to do this, maybe we need to look at the policy, because if you start doing continuous feedback, it's no reason that you aren't making adjustments and thinking about it continuously. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Well, with that, we conclude our discussion on the calendar. If we could get a motion.
Move approval. Second.
Everyone in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous that is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. We are moving on to our agenda item number 8, and I will ask Dr. McKnight to proceed with the presentation.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Mr. Hall, Mr. Hollis, Ms. Edwards for all of your work on the conversation with the calendar. I want to thank the board as well for really asking a lot of great questions and giving us a lot of things to consider moving forward. As we were just having this, I was like, what do we take away from this hearing? Definitely going and talking to our community leaders, our diverse community leaders, to really start with the question, what are the key times that people gather so that we can take advantage of that, is like one that we definitely are walking away with, that we can put in into practice immediately. I also wanted to say, because I looked over to my left, I saw Mr. Johns is still here, and I wanted to point out that long before today, I would say probably a couple of years ago, when we were working through COVID and we talked about the importance of the Equity Hub and how that just spoke to us working with community members to provide an opportunity for our children to still be educated when we could not, was born out of how do we make sure we take this into consideration always. So I wanted to thank him for that, because I'm sure he remembers those conversations of how do we want to continue to put some of these things into practice moving forward. And I hope you and many others who are members of our community, Mr. Johns, who have seen how this whole out-of-school time evolution has taken place, has elevated our community, standing out in so many different ways to serve our children, which I'm very proud of, as you should be, as Montgomery County residents. So thank you. All right. So I think we are ready to transition into the next topic, which is an overview of the fiscal year 2024 operating budget. So again, the time of year that we know December represents, which is for us to talk about our fiscal state of Montgomery County. And I'll ask if the team could bring up our presentation. That would be great. But this is the time of year in which we begin to talk about the fiscal outlook of our school system, what those needs are, and how we are planning for that. I'm also, again, proud to say that just a moment ago I was talking about the strength of our community, but it has been through many conversations with our community stakeholders, with our internal staff who are expertise at the jobs that they do. Welcome to our budget team, who are over here sitting so proudly as they've worked so hard all year, under the leadership of Mr. Riley and Mr. Hull and many others, to make sure we're planning for the fiscal outlook of the system over, quite frankly, a 12-month calendar. And so I'm excited that, the time has come for us to really talk about what we've learned from our investments last year to what's on our mind for this coming year to continue to move our school system forward. As we get into the presentation, and thank you for bringing that up, I just wanted to remind us of just the global outlook of kind of where we are right now. Since COVID-19 was declared an emergency in March of 2020, I'll say Montgomery County Public Schools was not the only ones to experience the impact of it, but 17,000 school districts across the United States were experiencing so much impact from COVID-19. And while we all collectively, through Zoom and on phone calls across the nation, were problem solving together, it has been clear that the impact of COVID-19 on staff and students and the importance of us continuing to focus on a number of key areas continue to be at the top of mind for MCPS. One, us being focused on teaching and learning and the impact of that on our students given all that has happened with the pandemic. The mental health of our students and staff continues to be at the forefront, and MCPS operations. And there's nothing about what I just mentioned that you wouldn't see that clearly outlines our strategic plan. And the areas of our strategic plan. So that's going to continue to drive an alignment between what we have done in the district and what we're going to continue to do moving forward. I'm also very reflective now of the past 2 years. Last year, it seems far away right now, but we weren't even in this room together. We were across the hall over into the auditorium having board meetings because we were still managing the impact of COVID-19. But since then, which would have been last December to this December, we're here in our regular boardroom, and I'll give you something else that's changed significantly, our student enrollment. Up until this fall has been the first time that we've seen significant impact in student enrollment in MCPS since the pandemic. We now have enrolled over 2,000 students back since our enrollment has dropped from the start of the pandemic. And for me, that's very important. For you, I know that's very important because what it says to all of us is that our community believes that it's, we're in a place where we can bring our children back and that we can still educate them to be college community and college career and community ready. And so that increase, I believe, speaks positively to the faith that our community has in us and how we're going to serve our children. But it also signals the impact of funding. Because we want this to happen, right? Our students coming back into the school system, but that means we now are responsible for all the services that we have to provide for our students and thinking about how we do that fiscally. So I'll say that the operating budget is built on a solid base as far as our work in Montgomery County. We build this budget taking into consideration some of the priorities that I mentioned, but also the Maryland Blueprint. And I continue to say all of the components of the Maryland Blueprint in Montgomery County Public Schools represents the floor. We have to build up to the ceiling and what that means for how we provide services to our students. The recommended 24 operating budget, I'll say, is an opportunity for us to present to you and the community all of the planning that we've taken into consideration based on those priorities. But it is the proverbial North Star is what I'll call it, in terms of thinking about how do we fund all the things that we want to accomplish and how that fits into what we want every student walking away with in the school system to really justify them receiving a quality education. And the budget is the basis of how well we're able to do that. So the operating budget that I look forward to recommending on December 19th, so asking everybody to block their calendars to be in tune. I understand that some hold watch parties and others. We welcome that. We welcome that. I think it needs to be a community-involved effort to really think about, one, what funding is needed to support the North Star of our school system, but also how it's going to take the understanding of everybody within our community to know what that is, and for us to continue to come back and say, now, as a result of these investments, what has happened? What have we seen? So I commit to us continuing to be very transparent with our community in that way. And I look forward to us embracing how we support our students. And when I say support, that means for those who need that support, but in that support also how we accelerate our students. And how does that then build upon the innovation that we continue to talk about, that we will build as our ceiling in Montgomery County Public Schools. Next slide, please. So I discussed this in terms of the alignment to our strategic priorities. When you look at the first pillar of our strategic plan, it focuses on the academic excellence. That continues to be a focus for us and always will be, I'm sure, in the existence of the school system, because that's our first and foremost priority. And so we're continuing to look at, again, how we support our students through a lens of support and accelerating, and how do we do that in the space of innovation. When I say innovation, we look forward to sharing research around what we have been reading, learning about, discussing, looking at in other places, different ways to approach some of our most dedicated spaces, like our classrooms in our schools, and how we need to design those spaces to further academic excellence. So that means in some ways defying some traditions that we've always had in place and trying to figure out what we can do differently. The second pillar is focused on well-being and family support. That continues to be a priority of the board that is reverberated in the system, in our schools, because we know that in order for our students to learn, they need to be emotionally well, socially well, as well as our staff. So we have to continue to focus on what does that look like in our investments, and what does it look like in our practice and implementation of fidelity to make sure that we have a well staff and students in our school system. And then the third pillar is really focusing on professional and operational excellence. When you think about the size of the school system, 14th largest in the nation, biggest in the state, we cannot start to think about innovation and how we recruit and retain for a system the size, as someone just said, over a few calendar months. This has to be what we consider constantly. I've also found in my experience at the executive leadership level in Montgomery County, all of our talent lies in our classrooms. That's where our future is in terms of our teachers, our principals, our supporting services staff, everyone. And so we want to continue to look and support those pathways so that, our students can also see, I can also build a career here in Montgomery County Public Schools. But to this purpose, when we think about not just some of the areas that have been very focused over the pandemic, like, of course, we know bus drivers, teachers have been areas, special education teachers specifically, during the pandemic that are areas that we have to pay attention to. We also have to pay attention to those areas that aren't highlighted as much that are important in just how we go about operating. Not that I'll get into the details of that right now, but this is a big organization that has to have everything happening to operate in a way that's cohesive. And I mean, we're one of the largest employers, and so really paying attention to what those operational needs are in our infrastructure is really important. So we look forward to continuing to highlight what some of those areas are so that the ease of how we function can also not just be felt internally, but also to our community. So I wanted to elevate those as examples of things that we're focusing on and thinking about in our future funding related to our strategic priority areas. Next slide, please. And just to remind us of what we've done to prepare for this month, the board in the past have met and talked about what the priorities are. And the board met on October 25th for members to provide their budget priorities for FY 2024. And we provided the opportunity to do that so that these priorities can be an important guide for what we then bring forward and recommend in the operating budget. Okay, next slide, please. And here's what you said. So from the board meetings over the past year, and from actually the board retreat that we were able to hold this past summer, there were 6 common themes that rose to the top as your priorities for the 2024 operating budget. And here they are here. I won't read them, but none of them are surprises or new, because this is the content that we've been talking about in all of our board meetings, and these have been things that we've committed to that we believe will take our priorities to the next level in Montgomery County Public Schools, and some of it's been supported through innovation in the blueprint, which makes all of that marry up nicely. So I wanted to share that with you just to give you a reminder from the summer and then moving forward through the fall, what the board has said as a continued area of focus and investment for the school system. So with that, this is a presentation I always look forward to sharing with our finance team as well. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hull, our Chief Operating Officer, who will continue in the presentation, and then we will go back and forth to talk about the content here. Mr. Hull.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. McKnight. Next slide, please. So as we prepare the FY24 budget, we are lucky to be starting from a good place here in Montgomery County. We received one of the largest budget increases in the system's history last year of almost $138 million. It represented about a 5% increase over the previous year's budget, which has put us in a great place for this current school year. We've got a budget of about $2.9 million, and so that's our starting place right now as we look forward to building on that for next year. Next slide, please. So where does the money come from? How is this school district funded? Of course, in Maryland, we are a dependent school district. We do not have the authority to raise taxes on our own, but we rely on the county government, the state government, and to a lesser extent the federal government to provide us with the funding. So the superintendent will recommend her budget to the board will approve that budget, and that budget request is then sent to the county, and they are the ones who will determine the amount of funding that we will actually receive at the end of the day. So you can see here in Montgomery County, we're a bit unique. We receive about 63% of our total funding from the county government. Statewide, that number is closer to 50%, so we do rely more heavily on our local government here. We receive about 30% of our funding from the state, whereas statewide that number is closer to 43%. So we do receive less state aid, and a higher portion of our budget does come from local sources here in the county. Additionally, we receive a small, about 3% of our budget from the federal government, although, as I'm sure many of you have heard, the adage always goes, they're providing 3% of the budget, but pass down many mandates that the district must adhere to. We also have some enterprise funds and special revenue funds that make up about 3% of our budget, and this year we did dip in slightly to our fund balance, which made up about 1% of the operating budget in this current year. So it's important to note that 93% of the budget is funded by state and local sources. Next slide, please. So that's where the money comes from. So where does the money go? So as you can see on the pie chart here, about 90% of our total budget goes to staff salaries and benefits. This is a large number in any school district. It's especially large here in Montgomery County. We really do focus on our employees, building their capacity and the needs of our teachers and our support staff to meet the needs of our students. It's also important to note here as we look at the pie chart, there are a few other smaller pieces, equipment, contractual services, supplies and materials, and others. But again, the vast majority going to our employee salaries and benefits. I also wanted to just note that as we look at where those staff are located, the vast majority are in our schools working directly with our students. About 2% of the overall budget goes to what would be considered by the state of Maryland as district administration, and that puts us at one of the lowest percentages of any of the LEAs in the state. So keeping it as lean as we possibly can amongst our administrative functions and really pushing this money down to the classroom and to the school where it is most impactful for our students. Next slide, please. So this is our per pupil funding over time. Of course, we have a large budget here in Montgomery County, almost $3 billion. That's in part because we have a very large school system of over 161,000 students. So how do you compare our budget to some of the other local education agencies in the state that are significantly smaller in size? And one of the ways to do that, so it's as much of an apples to apples comparison as we can make, is by the per pupil funding. How much are we being funded for each one of our students that is enrolled in Montgomery County Public Schools? And so that's what is shown on this chart. And it goes back to the turn of the century. So 2001, we were at about almost $9,000 per student. And as you can see, the number climbed steadily and significantly right up until around 2008, 2009, when, of course, the country experienced one of the worst financial calamities in recent memory. And since then, it took about 10 years before we even got back to that place of being funded at the almost $15,000 per student level, and then we've seen modest increases since then. Next slide, please. And actually the same slide, but adding one more data point here, and this is actually the exact same funding, the per pupil funding, but it's adjusted for inflation. So as we're all very well aware, especially in today's economic environment, inflation is very real. And if we're seeing inflationary costs year over year, the amount that we can purchase with a set amount of dollars goes down. So we refer to it as our purchasing power. How much can we actually purchase with the dollars we receive? And that's what the second line here is showing, is that when you adjust for inflation, we actually have not even gotten back to where we were in 2009. So adjusted for inflation, we're still seeing now less than $11,000 per student per year, which is right around where we were in 2010. And again, this is the number that really matters because, as we all know, the cost of fuel goes up, the cost of food, the cost of goods, and the cost of our employees and our teachers and all of our staff continues to increase each year, as it should. But this really shows a picture of what our purchasing power is. And I would just add as well that I think anyone who's been with the system for a while or been in education over these 10 and 20 years would agree that the demands on school systems across the country have only increased during this time. Here in Montgomery County, our student population has become more diverse. The challenges presented by the pandemic around social, emotional well-being and mental health have never been more at the fore than they are now. And so as the needs continue to grow, we continue to press to do more with less, frankly. So I will pause there and turn it over to our Associate Superintendent of Finance, Mr. Riley.
Can I just interject for a second? Because this was really one of our most powerful slides in this for our board and for our community. Mr. Hall, I want to thank you. He's had experience in finance in a number of school systems outside of Maryland, and so he did come in saying, you know, you need to look at where we are over time, over longer than a decade. And as he spoke to that part about we're asked to do more, we are, and we're actually not turning away from that responsibility. I feel like for the school system to be involved in so many different ways has benefited the school system becoming closer to the community in the partnership. So we want to continue to do that. But we also have to be very realistic about where we are right now. And as Mr. Hull so eloquently spoke to inflation, of course, when we were even projecting the needs over last year, we had no idea fuel would be where it is today. And we don't know where it's going to go. We see all types of projections for the outlook economically for the country and for our county. But what we do know is that we're going to make a commitment to continue to serve our students at high levels so that they leave us college, career, and community ready. And when they hear, even starting out in our school system as pre-K, we're going to start them out with the most valuable opportunity in their education. So when we think about what that means, we really have to reflect on what this gap has represented in terms of the continued needs of services and where the current funding is. Last year was historic, but when you look at in terms of what the school system was able to receive, but when you look at the numbers here in terms of where we are with inflation, we are nowhere near being caught up. Nowhere near where we were close to the funding of the school system back to where we were in 2001. So I just want to thank you, Mr. Hull, for pushing us to really look at what this means over time financially for our school system and where we need to go, and for us to be transparent with, you know, historically what the funding is and where we are now and what we need to provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hull, Dr. McKnight. Good afternoon, President Silvestri and board members. Next slide, please. So we're bringing up COVID because, as we noted, inflation is going to be a common theme here. But fortunately, last year, we did receive, or a year and a half ago, in response to the pandemic, the federal government did provide us with one-time relief funding to address the impact that COVID has had on our school district. The bulk of that, $389 million, is through our Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER. And this slide reflects how we've utilized these funds in a variety of areas, such as summer school, tutoring, and technology. It was just about a year ago that we had this board meeting, and we talk about the different areas that ESSER is helping us through this phase. So, next slide, please. So our ESSER funding was provided in 3 phases, each with a staggered expiration date, the last one being 9/30/2024, or the first quarter of FY25. And as you can see, we're about halfway through the overall grant period, and we've spent or encumbered about 60% of those total fundings to date. We'll not be leaving any of those funds on the table because many of the needs that COVID brought with it, as mentioned, still exist. The numbers you see here do appear in your monthly financial report, which is in today's board meeting, and they'll continue to be updated and shared on a monthly basis. As we've mentioned in previous ESSER updates, we do have the ability to amend our original grant application as our needs shift, but we're also approaching that ESSER cliff. So staff has been diligently evaluating programs that are in ESSER that need to be part of our operating budget, and these evaluations will continue to be part of our upcoming board meetings. Next slide, please. So in addition to board input at the board meetings, we also get to hear public input on budget matters, and in January we'll have your hearings and work sessions regarding the operating budget. And we also receive stakeholder input from our Budget Advisory Committee, or BAC, on the operating budget, as well as other budget-related topics such as ESSER. This year, we've expanded the number of students in the BAC that met 4 times this fall, with members of all the other stakeholders group, as you see on this slide. We also did a survey at the end of last year and took into account some of the ideas that the Budget Advisory Committee had, one of them being that they wanted to meet more in person. So we were able to do one in-person meeting, and we did other virtual meetings. We increased the number of students. We provided an actual physical book because some of the BAC members wanted to have that, as myself, wanted to flip through to be able to read. So those are some of the improvements that we made in the Budget Advisory Committee. This year, I want to say it's the first time in many years, I'm not sure when the last time we did it was, but we had 3 community budget forums, basically like a budget 101 for the community. We met on November 12th in Wheaton. We had a virtual meeting on the 28th, and then we recently had a meeting on the 30th in Spanish, all in Spanish. These were opportunities for the board for the community to not only understand the process, but also to provide input. And I thought it went really well. I think this is going to be the first year of a long tradition now. So, next slide, please. So we've spoken, or Dr. McKnight mentioned that we're pleased to report that student enrollment has gone up after 2 years of lapse right there. And although, like many other districts in the country, we still haven't reached our pre-pandemic levels. This increase, as Dr. McKnight noted, speaks directly to our funding, as our state and local funding is tied to that 155,713 number that you see right there. Just to explain a little too, we have a note on the bottom there, but our total enrollment is the 165,554, which you might have seen in other communications, but our funding is based on the 155,713, which subtracts pre-K as well as other adjustments to that. So our funding is based on the 155. Student enrollment is the 165,554. And when we build our budget, we actually do it on projected enrollment, so that we take into account some of the enrollment that happens after the start of the school year. So when we talk about enrollment, we're talking about 3 different numbers sometimes. Next slide, please. So when developing her budget, in addition to addressing the priorities and needs of the system, the superintendent also takes into account the current fiscal environment. So one of the items that affect that environment will be the continuing discussion of how we evaluate the effectiveness of our ESSER programs that may or may not need to be part of our ongoing budget, which we spoke about before. Another fiscal factor is the increase in student enrollment also generates the need to hire additional staff. And with that, in this tight labor market, we have to make sure that the new and existing staff salaries are competitive so that we're able to attract and retain the highest quality staff. Another fiscal concern is the rising cost of healthcare, and we've spoken about this before when we went through the RFP and award process. We actually changed vendors, and there was a considerable amount of savings when we did that. But when it comes to healthcare costs, they're always increasing. So what we realize as savings, in essence, was a reduction, a lower increase in those increase in rates. So that is another rate increase, but it was lesser than we would have had otherwise. So finally, I'd like to mention a big part of our fiscal environment over the past year, as we've discussed before, is inflation. So we've seen dramatic increases on our utility as well as our fuel costs, as well as the cost for materials, supplies, and contracts. And these all have a fiscal impact on how we support our students and schools. Not to be excluded, we've also had large increases in food costs that have resulted from the supply chain disruptions. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dr. McKnight, who's going to walk us through some budget planning considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Riley, so much for that, and I'm so happy that we were able to engage our community earlier this year, even in the budget advisory process, just to get the discussion going and paying attention to not just what we need to build for the future of Montgomery County, but how we're doing currently, and how does ESSER play into all of that. Before I go into a follow-up to the fiscal environment and the things that we want to continue to pay attention to, I just wanted to draw a connection to a conversation we just had around calendar, because I think it's important to continue to make these connections. If you would go back to slide 8 for me, please. I did say this was one of the most important ones. They all are. But I want to draw your connection to back in 2001, when you think about how MCPS was funded per student. You'll see that in 2001, given how we were funded and given inflation at the time, we were only off by maybe $700 per student, right? Now, the red is where we're currently funded, given current inflation.
Is that different than what's up?
Given the current inflation.
One more click.
Yeah, one more click, sorry.
On the slides.
On this, so that we can see the orange line.
I just want to have the code for the color red and color blue.
Oh, yes. Yes, we hear that, Ms. Yang. We can update that and make sure we include the code so that you and our viewers, actually, we can do that before we actually send it out, or we can update that on the public record, so that we can show that the orange line represents current inflation, and the blue line represents current the funding. Yes. Okay. What I wanted to draw your attention to is the difference between 2001, when there was a difference in funding around $700 per student. If we come up to 2023, you see there's a difference of $7,500. Now, why we know what that means, but I want to connect it to a conversation we just had. We were just discussing the school calendar and how we need to innovatively look at how we're providing other opportunities for our students. So, right. So we've been doing that for the past 2 years to pilot the type of calendar that we just approved. How have we been funding that? Through ESSER. So equity hubs, all of the other activities that we've provided for students. I'll never forget the smiles at Top Golf, for the Montgomery College staff that support our students for coding activities. We still and should pay for those services. But the fact of the matter is those services have been paid for through ESSER. So as a community, we have to continue to say, if these are services that we value and we see them aiding our students in our continued development moving forward, we as a system have to be able to self-sustain in our advocacy for what we need financially to continue those services. So I wanted to draw that connection between the two, because just a moment ago we were celebrating the benefits, and we'll need to continue to provide those benefits for students in receiving out-of-school time services academically and from an enrichment perspective, but we've been funding that all through ESSER, and that will not be available to us beyond 2024.
This will be the last year that's available for this. This will be the last student.
year.
The budget that we're building right now, it will be the last full year that ESSER funding is available,
right.
correct?
That's exactly right. So I wanted to just share that with you because as we now talk about the budget that we need using forward, we're really going to have to take in the consideration of what the local funding contribution will continue to be to maintain those services. And I also want to say, I've been able to be a part of conversations at the state with the state board, and I've constantly said that, in the way that our school system is funded is taking into consideration that we in Montgomery County live in a monolith of wealth, which is not the case. So right now, I want to be very transparent in where we are and where we need to go so that our community and our board members continue to understand the fiscal outlook of where we are. If we could go back to one of our final slides, because I have two more.
Just wanted to remind our board members to use their mics so when you ask your questions so that the listening audience can hear you.
Thank you. And that would be slide number 14. One more. Back one more. There you go. So just wanted to be able to share with you some of the budget planning considerations given the priorities that you've shared with us before, the fiscal outlook of what we need to provide in terms of services through our staff, and many other different ways that we build the budget. These are things that we want to make sure you understand that, one, the recommendation that I make to you later in the month on December 19th is going to support our students' individual and academic needs. First and foremost, as we continue to think about how we need to rebound from the pandemic. Okay, so that's a priority. It's also going to support operational excellence, acquiring and retaining the best teachers in the classroom and the best staff workforce so that we're continuing to not look at hiring as what do we need, but what do we desire that's going to ultimately benefit our students. This FY 2024 budget is also going to accelerate learning recovery for our students and looking mostly at who have been impacted and will need that learning recovery that's supporting their academic futures moving forward. It will fund research-backed practices. I mentioned that earlier. We've spent some time really doing the research around what it is that our students need and how is it not a one-size-fits-all model and how that is to be brought forward to Montgomery County and bringing the highest quality teaching and learning and programs to our students. So those are things that I wanted to just point out to you that is going to continue to focus on how we hone in on our students and their learning, which is, again, the reason that we are here. Finally, the budget is going to focus on innovating through expanding new models for how we organize in our schools, how we deliver instruction in the classroom and what that needs to look like today, how we can also intentionally break down barriers that we know have stood in the way of student success in a lot of different ways. We've learned a lot about that from our anti-racist audit, and we've also learned a lot about it from hearing from our staff and seeing the result on students. So we simply will not meet our students' needs by relying on the same approaches that we've had in the past. And that's one of the biggest areas of innovation that we continue to look at in the space of teaching and learning. So I look forward to sharing with you all the research that we've done and looking at our student data, what we've said needs to be the continued direction in Montgomery County Public Schools. And to wrap this up, this is a slide that we've shared at all of our budget community forums, but it really talks about the developing process and how we go into the budget season for the long haul. And when I say the long haul means it actually already started with our community conversations. And it actually started in the summer when we had to start working internally about how we prepare for this process. So really, it's fluid throughout the entire year. But for the purposes of our community, the active part of our community in continuing to be involved in this process is from December to June, when the board ultimately is able to approve the operating budget for the system. So on December 19th, I'm going to be sharing the details of our recommended budget with the board and the community. In January, we look forward to being able to hear from our community in our public hearings in which our community members will come and testify on the budget, and there are going to be work sessions with the board in which they're able to dig deeper into all the parts of the budget to get a better understanding publicly. You're scheduled to tentatively adopt the budget on February 7th before we then turn it over to the county executive and the county council for consideration, because they then vote on May 25th on the funding level for next year's budget for the school system. And then finally on June 6th, the board will vote to approve in final form the 2024 operating budget. So that's our timeline, and we look forward to many others engaging with us and being a part of this advocacy, most importantly for the needs of our students and our community. So that concludes our presentation, and I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Silvestri, for any questions or comments.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate the presentation, in particular slides 9 and 10, which kind of break out the ESSER funding, how much and for what. I think it came so quickly, and it's good to see it in this format, so that very understandable and clear. I appreciate that. I'll ask my colleagues to turn their lights on if they have questions, but I will just start with slide number 12 again, so that we're all on the same page in terms of student enrollment. 155,713 is what we had as of September 30th of this year, and that becomes our official number. But I think I heard you say that since then we've had additional students enroll, and now we're up to 165,554. Is that correct?
No, like we're looking at enrollment and what's included or not. So the 160 is our total enrollment, which includes pre-K. The 155 excludes pre-K, but that's what our funding is based on. And then I did mention projected enrollment too, because that's what we do our staffing on. So those are the three ways that we look at enrollment.
Okay, so what is the 2,322? 2,322 total student enrollment increase, 2022 to 23 school year. It's right above the arrow?
Yeah, so I think that's looking at the 160 total compared to last year's 160, but I don't think we're showing that here.
Okay,
That's,
so
yeah.
155 paid for by one funding formula, and then the pre-K slots are paid through a different mechanism.
Through Blueprint, we get pre-K money, yeah. So not based on enrollment, based on seats.
Okay, but right now we talk about having 161,000 students. Where does that number come from? Is pre-K?
Pre-K, yes.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
If I may, the 160,554, that was a September 30th count. We are over 161,000 students as of October, as of the end of October. So we did see additional students come in, once the school year was started. So there was some growth there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hull. Great point. I'm so glad he mentioned that.
Yeah.
The September 30th is the last day that the state collects that enrollment number for funding. One of the things that myself and many other leaders across the state have been very interested in is, as we continue to look at the change of enrollment since the pandemic, it happens fluidly, so the number does continue to go up after September 30th, but we're not funded for those students because the count ends at the state on September 30th.
And as we all know, our International Student Office alone enrolled 1,000 students in September alone.
Yes.
So I'm curious, I'm imagining, so October is a similar number. Those are huge numbers.
Right.
That's a high school, you could fill a high school in the fall semester with just international admissions. So
So just to add on, so we didn't talk too much about maintenance of effort, but that is one of the problems with using maintenance of effort as a funding formula, because it's always a year, it's lagging behind, right? We're using this year's data for next year, as well as it doesn't take into consideration inflation, which we spent a lot of conversation today talking about inflation.
thank you. And my final question is slide 13, the current fiscal environment. I know the legislature passed the Family Medical Leave Act. Are we not at all going to be impacted by that as a major employer in the county? Don't we have to provide paid medical leave? And isn't that a budget item?
Yeah, and we're still working through what those cost effects will be for that as well.
Okay, because I don't see it here in the current fiscal environment.
That's a very good point.
Any questions from? Yeah, I can't see your.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah.
I can't see your light because of the flowers.
Oh, yes. Okay. For slide number 12, I have a question. I understand that after taking off the pre-K and other dual enrollment students, 155 and some this year. I'm just trying to understand the 2019 number. Is that the number of actual enrollment, or is that the number of funding that has already taken off the pre-K and dual enrollment student?
Yeah, this chart is showing funding. So on the last, just on the last bullet point, we were trying to show what the 160 is in reference to the funding, but the slide itself is funding.
It is funding, so that was the highest point of our enrollment in history, in recent history.
Correct, formula-based funding, right?
And then on slide number 8, I appreciate you're going to put the color coding there. And is it possible to also put the scale in as, thank you so much.
Ms. Harris.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to follow up on Ms. Silvestri's first question around the enrollment numbers that we're seeing. And this is kind of gets to a little bit of a historical perspective, because I believe pre-COVID, our enrollment numbers were almost up to 166,000 students. And I'm wondering if, we're seeing pre-K growth, if the proportion of the student number that we report has been consistent over time between K-12 and pre-K. So right now we're saying, 155,000 and change are in our K-12 schools. And then the additional that we report in our 160,000 and change enrollment are made up by pre-K students. Is that general proportion? Has that been steady over time, or are we seeing the pre-K numbers increasing proportionally?
Yeah, this represents an increase from prior year. So I think it's a bigger increase than in the past, if that answers your question.
Yeah, and because I guess in the back of my mind, I'm wondering, when we're thinking about students coming back after COVID and into school, how our K-12 numbers are matching up to our pre-pandemic levels of K-12 enrollment. And you probably don't have that with you, but if just for general comparison about, where we're going and how the word is getting out and how many folks are actually coming back to us, that would still be in that K-12 window, that would be interesting. And I just wanted to mention too, I really do appreciate the ongoing and continual focus that we've had collectively since, early 2021 on making sure that as these ESSER funds come in and we're looking at their permissible use, and we're looking at, the end dates of ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, that we're really always keeping in mind, using those funds very strategically, so that whatever we're doing with them are either one-time expenses, infrastructure, or things that we know we can sustain over time. And so I think the fact that we talk about it all the time and we're always looking at it, I think I think that's hugely important. And then the last thing I'm going to say is when, Mr. O'Reilly, when you were talking about, we want to make sure that we're competitive as our enrollment increases, and we need to therefore increase our staff. So we want to be very competitive in that marketplace. Let's not forget, and we talked about this at the last fiscal management meeting. So that's, more, coming attractions for my new colleagues on the fiscal management committee with me, was looking at the fact that we really do, oftentimes when we're talking about, negotiations with our associations and things like that, we kind of limit it to salaries, but the benefits package that this school system provides to employees and retirees is exceptional. And we want to make sure that, I see from sitting on the fiscal management committee how committed we are to being very good stewards of the commitment to those, pension and benefit funds. But I think we need to emphasize how amazing that benefit package is to our prospective workforce. Because if you don't have anything to compare it to, you don't see how amazing it is. But I've talked to a lot of teachers who have shared with me how much they have been enriched by over time and years by the benefit package that this school system provides.
We agree, Ms. Harris, and actually lead most of our recruitment conversations with MCPS benefits. And as you remember, last year in our budget process, we really talked about the importance of being able to protect that, because that is one that allows us to be able to stand out so that we can use it as a recruitment strategy. Thank you so much for mentioning that.
Well, if there are no other, Ms. Rivera,
Just very quickly, with the new students that are coming, which it's a significant number, so the cutoff for the state, as Ms. Wolf explained to me, is September 30th. So after that, we still have to teach those children at the same, right? And so the funding for that comes out of where? And is there then a way to retroactively get the funding from the state? Or is that something that is legislatively unallowed? But if not, my hope would be that when we are advocating for the budget, that is very clear to our local funders and our state funders. And it would just be interesting, right, over the last couple of years, what that bill has been to strictly MCPS to, I guess, pay out of pocket. Is that what I'm...
That's a good point. I mean, I don't know if retroactive was ever considered, but right now what we're working with is we're just using the numbers we have and then projecting. So when you look at our revenue source, it's going to be what our actual numbers here, this 930. But when you look at our projected expenditures, we're using that projected enrollment to help build staffing for that too. And I think a lot of our other LEA partners do the same thing too, because of the delay in maintenance of effort and the way this is structured. You have to look forward.
Very well. I also am interested in Ms. Harris's point about where the growth is actually coming from. Are our students K-12 actually coming back? So if we could get that information, and please remember to include the international student admissions, because like I said, those numbers are in the thousands alone. So that alone could make up for the growth that we're seeing. So I just think we need to understand that more fully.
Very good.
I want to thank you for the presentation, and this concludes this part of the agenda. We are now...
Actually, we do have an extension
right.
to this, Ms. Silvestri.
2 more slides.
Mr. Hall, you wanted to introduce School Meals Project?
Great, thank you. So we do have a couple more slides here we're going to share. This is specifically around school meals, and so... but it's connected to the budget, very closely connected to the budget. So we added these at the end, and we'll have a moment for discussion around these as well. But I welcome back to the table Ms. Dana Edwards, and for the third time today, and Ms. Rachel Dubois.
Good afternoon again. I wanted to come back and really revisit May of last year. There was a resolution passed by the board. Ms. O'Looney actually passed it prior to her graduating and leaving MCPS to go on to college, around a school meals redesign that she wanted us to do within the Department of Food and Nutrition Services, and really be able to stop and focus on the types of meals that we are providing our students. One of the pieces that was in the resolution that was very important to the board was that 40% of this work group includes students. And so what we wanted to do today, and I have Mr. Dubois here with me, who is our oh my goodness, I've been here for a while, I'm so sorry, who is our director of the Department of Materials Management. We'll walk you through the work that we've done in terms of really thinking about how we've redesigned that menu, really focusing on what our students are telling us, and things that are changes for this year, but how that process continues to go on and on and on, and we are still hosting tastings and receiving feedback throughout the year. So what you'll hear is that we had about 60 students who were engaged with us throughout this process on the actual work group as we put it together, from 20 different schools across the system, which is really important. And the key component component here, and we talked a little bit about it earlier with the calendar presentation, is it's ongoing. So even though we got the initial recommendations to get the school year started, the one thing that I love is we can be in a school at any given time looking at different options that actually speak to who students are culturally, as well as what they have interest in actually having on their menu. So I want to turn it over to Ms. Dubois at this time to be able to share more information.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. Welcome to share. Just a quick summary. If we can take a look at the next slide. As Ms. Edwards shared the resolution, thank you. The resolution went back in May of last year, and it was interesting timing, right, because our students were getting ready to leave for the summer, and so we worked with our student leadership office to reach out to students over the summer and had about 60 students interested. And during the course of a few months, we were able to host not only a summer meeting, but 4 different work group sessions. And during that time, really focusing on what students had identified prior to meeting as their areas of when they thought about menu redesign or food services changing or improving, what really they had in their mind of what they were looking for. And this was great timing, right, because we were coming off of the end of the year where we were still under the waivers of free meals, and we were still feeding meal box kits for different groups who still were not back at school. And so some of the things that the students identified in terms of their interests included nutrition information, portion sizes, food quality, cultural and philosophical dietary preferences, the menu design itself, special dietary needs, recipe development, and plant-forward and plant-based menus. And then in addition to the students, we also reached out to some community partners who, just to see if they would like to be included, and we had a wonderful response. So included in the meetings were Alliance for a Healthier Generation, Montgomery County Food Council, Real Food for Kids, Healthy School Food Maryland, MANA, SNAP Ed, Montgomery County Health and Human Services consistently attended the meeting. And then in an effort to reach beyond the work group and maintain energy and momentum around student feedback and voice, we hosted, as Ms. Edwards said, a few different food tastings. We did a partnership with Silver Diner. We taste tested food with our Paint Branch High School students, Poolsville, Springbrook, Tacoma Park Middle School. We hosted some tours of our central production facility. And then the team also went out and did some focus group meetings and tastings at Seneca Valley High School and Walter Johnson High School. And then right now our school-based supervisors have begun to roll out our in-school tasting and tours. We did a lot of these before the pandemic, and so the students in the work group did provide feedback on how to enhance these opportunities. Prior to pandemic, it was really school-based supervisors coming out and maybe testing with a class in one cluster, and so we are rolling out these tastings in all clusters at all levels of schools, and we're menuing and tasting the items that are currently new on the menu, and we're previewing some we'd like to put on the menu. And then additionally, in terms of keeping that momentum from the work group, we were awarded 2 grants this year that really play into student voice engagement and focus around food services. The one is a Healthy No Kid Hungry grant, and the other one is a Team Nutrition grant. The Team Nutrition grant is really exciting because it plays into exactly what we were doing in the work group. MSDE awarded 6 schools in the state the Team Nutrition grant, and we have 3 of the schools involved in the grant. So we have John Poole Middle School, Farquhar Middle School, and Blake High School. And the Team Nutrition grant is really similar to the student work group. So they're going to work with a chef who's going to inspire some ideas. The kids will inspire ideas, have some recipe development, go through a round of tastings, and eventually roll out some new menu items for us. And then if we can go to the next slide, just to talk about the direct impact from the school meals work group summary. So as you can see, the direct impacts for the work group include the student voice and engagement. One thing I'd like to highlight is a student feedback form. We're working with our communications teams to roll out that to all students in the district through email, and being able to work with our teams at EGPS to have posters with QR codes for feedback, opportunities for other groups to come in and tour our central production facility, and then a strong partnership not only with our CTE classes, but our FACS classes as well, our family and consumer science classes. Many of you have seen some new menu format during the work group meeting. We took feedback on that and how to realign. We categorized entrees a little bit different. We upgraded our allergen database. We focused on our plant-based and plant-forward recipes, and then expanded our direct delivery and fresh fruit and vegetable program. We work with the USDA, Department of Defense, DoD fresh fruit and vegetable program. So the students in the work group had said, can we get more schools? So we reached out to bring on some more schools, and I believe by the winter we'll have all of our middle schools on board and many of our high schools, and then working down to our elementary schools. And then finally, the direct menu items that the students of the work group really did give feedback on and vet as menu items were our sweet heat potatoes. We have a 3-bean torta, a vegan red bean curry, a bean dip, a Cuban-inspired beef, and veggie crumble tacos. So some of it is on the menu now, some of it is coming out in the next few months. And as Ms. Edwards said, it was a short time to have the students through the work group, and we recognized the need, just hearing those small number of student voices, to continuously reach out and get ongoing feedback. And so I think with the FACS classes and CTE classes, and just the tastings throughout all of our schools wrapping up by the spring, we'll have good opportunities to work on changes to our menu. But thank you, it was a great experience with the kids, and I just want to thank all the students who were involved and the Division of Food Nutrition Services, who really embraced the whole process. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Hannah for introducing this concept a year ago. So if we visit a school now, we can see some of these changes, or they're coming?
So we can see
Depends.
many of the items. The torta's coming out on, I think, the next month menu, and the curry is out already, so definitely. And then we also have a schedule of the focus groups at different schools that we'd
So
be
we'll have
happy
to
to
change
share.
our lunch, check our calendars to see what's being served.
Just to see.
that day.
We also have, coming up in February, I forgot the best part, we, just inspired by the students in the classes, they had a lot of questions around how we choose food. So this year's Taste of MCPS will take place in February. It's going to be a food show theme. So we have for some of our secondary students an opportunity for them to come in and see what it looks like when food service teams goes out to seafood shows, choose food, and how just pre-K through 12 education food services is geared in terms of how we select items for our families. So definitely come back for
Thank you.
Taste of MCPS February.
Yeah, and I just invite board members, when you visit a school, try to stop by lunch hour and get some lunch, because we hear a lot of feedback from our students about lunches, and we want to be tasting them ourselves. So, Ms. Harris?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a couple questions. I so appreciate this, and thank you for the shout out to Hannah. She actually sent me a couple weeks ago a link to a webinar that was hosted last week by the Harvard Food Systems Initiative that highlighted the work of the Chef Foundation with public school systems across the country. And I shared that with some of our DFNS staff, and I think some of them joined me there. Hannah joined me at that webinar. It was very interesting. And so, Mr. Blinsky, you mentioned several grants that DFNS has obtained to sort of expand this work. And, nutrition is so important to learning and being well. This is, essential work, I think. And I would just suggest that we take a look at some of the grants that are available through the Chef Foundation that are available to sort of help meet a variety of different goals that school systems might have to incorporate, additional fresh scratch, cooking into their meals instead of, frozen reheated type offerings, and also working more closely and intentionally with local growers. Even if each grower is somewhat on a small scale, they've sort of developed a state of the art where they can engage with multiple small growers to provide fresh produce through the school systems and still save money. So, kind of, busting the big myth bubble that, working with a giant food contractor, and we have big food contracts on the, on the consent agenda today, is the only way to really sustain your school lunch program over time from a fiscal perspective. So I would just put that on the radar. And a question I have, how does the school menu, say on a weekly basis, how is that determined? And is that standard across all 210 schools? Or if, as Ms. Silvestri just said, let's on our school visits, let's visit during lunch. And if we went to 3 different schools or 10 different schools during lunch on the same day, would we see the same foods available to students? And if not, why not?
Thank you, Ms. Harris, and great points. As in terms of the menu, the elementary and secondary menus are different. So our elementary menus, you would see the same thing every day across all schools, unless a delivery didn't show up or something needed to be substituted for that school only. The secondary menu, I think, as you all have seen, has a variety of choices. And so all of the choices are there. And secondary schools, because a lot of the cooking is done on site, they do have some options to change out some things if different vegetables are, available, or they want to change out the fruit, and so they work with their school-based supervisors. But yes, the menu, if you go to visit the secondary schools, they should be following the secondary menus, and elementary schools should be following the elementary menus. I love the point you made about the Chef Ann grant, because GFNS is looking into applying. They have applied before and have not been awarded the grant. We were happy we had No Kid Hungry and Team Nutrition this year, so we would definitely be reapplying for Chef Ann, and a lot of that work through that grant is around large districts and scratch cooking and fresher foods. So absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, okay. And then if we know, because, I hear from students all the time talking about the things that they see in their lunch line every day. And some students will be talking about, yeah, we had this great curry and things like that. And other students from different schools will be saying, what? I've never seen that. So how do school-based managers determine sort of the supply chain they're going to develop, or for their cafeteria services? I mean, how are they deciding which of the options that are provided centrally they're going to serve? How is that working?
Just in general, they really should be following the menu, and I think if you visit a school and they don't have the menu, it's important that the team know, right? So they have a bunch of food service supervisors that are going out every single day visiting schools. And what I found, if we hear of a school that says, hey, I've only had 1 choice on my menu in secondary schools and not 3, just working with the teams. I mean, there are many people to support in terms of how are you running your lines? Do you have 1 line for food and 1 for a la carte? Do you need to run all lines together? So really working with the team to problem solve, and also not going in of, hey, this is not working and, we're upset about it, but just a proactive approach. I mean, every school has different factors that they face as challenges of why lunch takes a long time or why they need to move a line quicker. So just coming from that proactive, we're your partners, we're here to help and problem solve, recognizing that not every day at lunch is going to be perfect, just like school, and that's okay. We learn from our problems and challenges, so coming at it from that lens, and we'll continue to do that, absolutely.
And then just one final, pitch for Edison. Edison has, the new Edison, the old Edison had no meal facilities. The new Edison does have a meal facility in the main lobby for those of you who've been there. But the offerings are very limited. And I was just there on Friday, and again, very, very limited options. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can take a look at what we can do to sort of tease apart the reason that the menu offerings there are basically the same all the time, and there are none of the new things that you're mentioning that are being offered there, and tease that apart and figure out why, and if there's something we can do to maybe increase the capacity of that kitchen facility, to let that school also take advantage of some of the new items and the culturally responsive and dietarily responsive items that are being produced. I think the Edison students and staff would really appreciate that.
Ms. Harris, thank you for highlighting.
You're late.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for highlighting that. We will do a direct follow-up with the CAF manager as well as the principal at Edison to understand, what their current offerings are and maybe if they've done something different. and where they are within that process. Again, doing those tastings is important because it at least provides an opportunity for students as well as the staff, because they also eat the school lunch that's there, to be able to provide input around it. And sometimes it's just knowing what options are available, because it's not just your standard options. So please allow us to do that, and we can follow up with you directly.
Yeah, that would be great, because, you know, the longest standing culinary arts program in the county is at Edison. And now, I mean, I don't know, this tech side isn't my area of expertise, but the facility there at Edison is not expansive as the facility at a traditional comprehensive high school. So it could be equipment based is a limiting factor to the offerings, but I would never want to encroach on Chef's territory there at Edison, but they do have a huge full-scale professional kitchen right across the hall. And if maybe there was some way to connect the two, the amazing culinary arts program and the equipment that they have there, to maybe provide a little bit of support to the cafe that's there for all students to take advantage of when they come to have lunch. Maybe that's a way to augment their capacity to increase the options and offerings.
Thank you. Just wanted to watch the time here. We're a little bit behind schedule, and we've got 3 more lights on, so let's move on to Mr. Kim.
Yes, thank you. And you know, school lunches, in my many conversations with students across the county, are by far the easiest topic to gauge some feedback around. But what I found is really less that students have a specific menu option or menu item that they're advocating for or that they're advocating against, but it's more so this idea of having an avenue to solicit feedback from students. And so I think these initiatives are really effective, and I'm wondering how, you know, while there's a lot of value in the specific menu redesign, I think that ingraining this process of soliciting student feedback into MCPS, into the school system, is invaluable in moving forward and making sure that you know, students will continue to have these avenues. And I think that the work groups and the tasting sessions and all these areas that have been explored are super effective. But I'm also considering, you know, what are the ways that we can expand to make sure that all students across the building really have that avenue, and even if they don't directly have that same avenue, are aware of those avenues, and ensure that students are being listened to and that their feedback is being considered in this process. And so, you know, I'm more than happy to collaborate and be creative around ensuring that is the case. But I'm just curious to see, you know, what steps we can take around that in specific.
You bring up a perfect point, right? So the difference between the feedback that you get in a work group with kids who may not be as familiar with each other was very different than the feedback that you get when you go to a school, right? So our biggest success is going to be going out to our schools for the focus groups and tastings with their peers, with their friends, kids that they're comfortable with, staff that they're comfortable with. So I think continuing our focus groups, expanding the number that we have, and then we're also working with our managers to let them know that they don't have to wait for a focus group to come to the school, right? And to be comfortable and confident enough with taking a new menu item and putting it on a tray. And we have some constraints with lines and lunch times and the pace of the day, but being able to say, hey, I put a sample as you go through the line, take it, let me know tomorrow what you think. And so I think the day-to-day feedback is more powerful, especially it's school by school. Yeah.
And then I wanted to follow up on Ms. Harris's question about the process for building those menus week by week. So like how those decisions are made beyond, like how, you know, when I find out this week I'm gonna have XYZ across the day, how is that decision made, when and what items and when?
I'm happy to follow up with you. We have a team at GF&S that really menus for the month based on nutritional guidelines and standards and things like that, and before we push it out to the schools and managers. So I'm happy to do that.
I ask because, you know, I think that in considering how we can ingrain this as part of the system, as soliciting student feedback, even if it's not necessarily a vote, like a survey, right, that informs next month's menu items. Steps like that we can take to at every part of this process, ensure that students are being involved. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ms. Yang?
Thank you. All the items mentioned sounds very delicious. I'm looking forward to February. Okay. I have two questions. First one is, I didn't hear any breakfast items. Is breakfast considered part of the scope of this project? If not, why not? Yes, what are the direction we're moving in that way? Second one is, I have heard lots of feedback in the community about the sugar content in our breakfast items and menus. So I would like, if there's an opportunity for us to examine that and take a look at. As we know, the nutrition, a lot of our students depend on the school breakfast to fuel them for the day, for the morning. So I just want to provide that feedback from the community. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a lot of that information available that we can send you and that we have available on our website. We didn't focus on breakfast. We do serve breakfast. We have a lower participation rate. And then also a lot of the menu items are quick grab and go as kids are starting their day. But we can definitely take a look at that. And then in terms of the nutritional information, we are required to ensure that all of our food meet the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, and it was updated in 2017. So they meet all the sugar, calorie, fat guidelines on there, and that we do post on the menu the calorie content as well. But we have the other nutritional information that's available as well.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So I look forward receiving that also. If we so if there's a perception there, and then if we have information, then we need to figure out ways to get our information out into the community. Thank you.
And Ms. Yang and Mr. Kim, I want to really kind of marry the two things that you said there, that even though the scope of the resolution focused on the menu redesign, and it was more around the lunch, because every student, even though breakfast may be sold in some schools and then it's offered to all students in other schools through the MMFA program, the one thing is that at least we have lunch that most students congregate around, and they're gaining something out of that time. So the scope of the work focused on lunch. But as we think about different ways to kind of make this more cyclical, something that's more immediate in terms of how I give my feedback, breakfast is a space for us to do that. And I'm also going to bridge in supper, because there are some schools in which we offer the supper program. So if we're offering a full complement, we would want to know the totality of the experience. And again, I think it's stretching it over the time frame. So thank you.
Ms. Rivera-Oven?
Thank you. I won't take long, because some of the questions that I had were already answered, but I just wanted to just get you said there were 60 students that were involved? Yeah. Hello, sorry, that's what you said. And I was just curious on the representation of the students, geographically, where they came from, and the ages and the demographics. Was it all high school kids, or were they also middle school kids involved? And as we continue to get feedback, like Mr. Kim was saying, I think it's important to engage different groups, populations of students as well. So I don't know how our special ed students are involved in the feedback of this as we continue to develop this. And I know this is at a very infantile stage right now, right? But as we are thinking of developing and creating pilots, that we are conscious of other areas of the county that we might want to also implement this program. And for me, food is very, very important, and access to food is very important. And I also wanted to kind of figure out if there's if our health officer is involved with any of this, with the nutrition factors, as since she's a pediatrician, because especially in my community, diabetes B2 is very prevalent, especially in young kids. So when Julie was talking about the high content of sugar and so on, it's something that we struggle with. And a lot of our children get their 2 main meals at the school. So thank you.
Thank you. We can definitely follow up or even tour the facility and take a look at some of the menu items. We'd be happy to do that. And in terms of the work group and the students, they self-selected, in terms of joining, but I think what it told us was, again, what Mr. Kim said, we really need to go out into our schools and get that direct feedback rather than the meetings of just in the moment, in the school, coming out, doing a focus group. So we'll continue that, and I'm happy to share.
Ms. Wolf?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that because, and follow up on your comment. When the students self-select, that leaves out a lot of our students because generally it's the student leaders who will go and participate. So I hope that you will go out to the schools so that it's more inclusive in terms of who's participating in this. And normally I like to say, be sure that our end of the county is included, but I heard that a number of our schools were, so I just want to make sure that you are all over the county and that everybody is getting a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf, and thank you, Ms. Rivera. I mean, we definitely will follow up. I think the timing, because we saw it in May, June, when students kind of dispersed, was a little bit difficult. So that's why being out in the schools will definitely help us, and we'll continue with the student focus groups on this.
And to address the specific question, I do remember the video, you all probably remember, of all the students. If I am not mistaken, I remember seeing students from all levels that participated, because I know Ms. Rivera Oven wanted to know about the levels too.
The levels on the work group for the kids who joined the meetings that we had online were grades 7 through 12, but we had all levels for the other tastings as well, and in our facility, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember the young ones being very candid and saying, I did not like
it. And that was at the school,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. As you can see, there's always a lot of interest in our meals and food programs, so really encourage our new board members to visit and get up to speed on everything. I think we did go through some difficult time with the pandemic and meal shortages, and so I really see this as a reset, hitting the reset with our meal program, and I look forward to hearing all the feedback from our school communities about the new and improved program. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. We're excited.
Thank you.
Okay, so this takes us to item number 9, consent items. Do any board members have any items they wish to pull? If not, then could I get a motion to move 9.1 through 9.12 in block?
Motion to move item 9.1 to through 9.12.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hands. And that is unanimous. Item 10 is from information only. Item 11 is comprised of the appointments to our 5 board committees. The final resolutions for these appointments will be posted on board docs for the public. I need a motion to approve all the committee appointments in block.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor, raise your hands. And that is unanimous. Can I get next we have the future closed session resolution and the report of the previous closed session. Could I get a motion to move 12.1 through 12.2 in block?
Move 12.1 through 12.2. Is that what you said?
Yes.
I don't want to drill blank.
Second.
Okay, that takes us to 12.3 on our agenda. Oh, sorry about that. All in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous. 12.3 on our agenda is calendar of major events for the election of the student member of the board, and wanted to ask Mr. Kim if he has any comments or updates around the process.
Yes, and as I'm looking at the words 46 student member of the board, I'm kind of taken aback. I don't think I've ever seen these words together. But yeah, I just wanted to take this opportunity to really highlight this really unique opportunity that we have here, not only in our country or the state of Maryland, but Montgomery County is one of few local education agencies with not only a student member of the board, not only with the student member of the board that can vote, not only a student member of the board that can vote with full voting rights, but a student member of the board of education who was elected by all the secondary students in the district. I've yet to find an election of this scope anywhere else in the nation in our school system, and it's election run entirely by our peers, by other students. And in these past 5 months, I've really had the opportunity to learn so much about our school district and about change making and about policy, and also had the opportunity to, I feel, really voice the concerns of students on these important issues. So, but it's a job that I think any student in our county is beyond capable of. It's really the only requirement, as I see it, is being a student in the system and being readily available to voice your concerns and the concerns of your peers. So with that, I'd just like to encourage any and all students, sophomores or juniors, to take this opportunity for civic engagement. Run in the election. If you don't decide to run, come to the nominating convention, which will be on the 15th of 2023. And if you don't come to the nominating convention, be sure to vote on the 19th of April. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I get a motion to approve the calendar of events?
Move approval.
Proud second.
I have a question. I just didn't hear what you said the nominating convention was.
It's on the 15th of February, per the resolution.
Ms. Harris? Did you have a question? Your hand's up. No? Okay, great. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Do we have any new business to bring forward? I see none. Item 13 is for informational purposes only. No vote is needed. Could I get a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. That's unanimous, and we are adjourned.